Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to day 3 of the Women Blaze Trails Festival. My name is Joe Gabreski, and I'll be your host for today. Friday was the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. And so last year, to celebrate, we launched a 3-day virtual festival featuring women in science, exploration, conservation, adventure, engineering, photography, filmmaking, and more from all across the planet. So the goal is pretty simple. We want to celebrate incredible women doing incredible things around the world, day in and day out. So all weekend long, including today, we've been meeting women on the front lines of their fields, showcasing their stories, work, challenges, adventures, research, and expeditions. So this festival is hosted and organized by Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. Our goal is to inspire the next generation of scientists and explorers. We do this by bringing those on the front lines of science, exploration, and conservation live into classrooms across North America through virtual guest speakers and field trips. So since 2015, we've hosted over 3,000 live events, connecting 500,000 students with scientists and explorers in 95 countries. And the cornerstone of what we do is that it is and always will be free for classrooms everywhere. If you've never visited our site before, here is the link, exploringbytheseat.com. This month, we have probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 live events for classrooms to join in camera spots, tuning in live via YouTube, or even catching the events afterwards in their classrooms or at home. This month, we've kicked all the men out. All month long, we're hosting Women in Science and Exploration. So do check out the website, whether you're an educator, a parent, curious person, to tune into some of these events live. On our YouTube channel, we probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 recorded events that you can check out anytime you want. And then this weekend, so far, we have day 1 and day 2 of the festival in a playlist you can find on our channel. It's called Women Blaze Trails 2022. So anything you miss from this weekend, tune in anytime over the next couple of weeks in that playlist. All right, let us get our events rolling. We're going from 9 o'clock Eastern to 4 p.m. Eastern today. So 14 live events coming your way. And our first one is starting right now. We've got Holly O'Donnell joining us. She's a Scottish conservation biologist and expedition guide with a passion for tropical rainforests and understudied species. Her fieldwork has taken her to Antarctica, Zimbabwe, Paraguay, Ecuador, and Peru. For 2 years, she studied large mammal populations in the Peruvian Amazon. And now she's the Director of Research and Co-Chair of Science and Education Advisory Committee with the Acer Foundation. So let's bring her in live with us right now. Hey, Holly, how are you?
Hi, Joe. I'm really good, thank you.
That's good. That's good. It's great to see you joining us from the UK, from Scotland. We are excited to have you kicking off day 3 to get to know you a little bit better. So I'm going to hide myself away and let you take over for a bit.
Excellent. Thank you. I'll just get my screen share.
All right, I see it coming in. Let me bring it up here.
Are we good?
Looks good.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you for having me here today. I'm always delighted to speak for Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. I'm going to talk you through a little bit about me today and my career so far as a conservation biologist. So today I'll just very briefly take you through my professional and academic background, and I'll have a fieldwork focus on my work in the Peruvian Amazon, as well as briefly touching on my plans for the future. So firstly, let's go back in time to the early 1990s. I grew up in a coastal town in the northeast of Scotland called Invergordon. I think a big aspect of my childhood that inspired me to travel was probably our holidays abroad to Spanish islands and to the Canaries. I had a very outdoor childhood. I loved animals, although I didn't have a lot of pets. I had a rabbit. And a lot of walking, which coincidentally ended up being the main component of my work and job in Peru many, many years later. I studied for a Bachelor of Science in zoology at the University of St Andrews, which is in Scotland. Much of that degree was based on marine ecology, marine biology, and it included a really exciting field trip to the Antarctic. It was a 3-week trip. We travelled on an ecotourism boat, and we collected data on a variety of marine mammals and birds at the same time. I fundraised for this trip because it was very expensive, and I was very lucky to receive the support of my local community here in Scotland and sponsorship from a number of local businesses. When I graduated from St Andrews, I realised that I lacked field experience other than my 3 weeks in Antarctica. And I also wasn't entirely sure exactly what I wanted to do. I had some ideas that I wanted to study animal behaviour. I definitely wanted to work in conservation. I liked warm weather. So I went to Paraguay, a country which I knew absolutely nothing about before I went there. But I booked a 3-month internship with an NGO called Para la Tierra. And the reason I booked specifically here was that I could design and carry out my own research project, which I felt was really important experience that I hadn't gained yet. So I designed, with the help of another intern, a project on this species of mouse opossum, which you can see in the photograph. It's a little marsupial that lives in the trees and on the ground, and I had a project where I would walk around the forest every morning and I would open these little traps that you can see in the middle photograph called a Sherman trap, and I would collect various pieces of information on these mouse opossums, such as their weight, their sex, their age. And it was a really, really interesting project. Additionally, I had the opportunity to join in with other intern projects. So I gained a variety of experience really from monitoring lizards, monitoring frogs. I volunteered on the long-term primate project. I learned how to use a GPS. I learned how to trap bats and mist nets. Most importantly, and this is advice I would always give to people, I learned what I liked and what I didn't like, and it wasn't necessarily what I expected. So before going to Paraguay, I thought I wanted to be a primatologist. Jane Goodall was a huge inspiration to me growing up. And actually, when I was in Paraguay, I realised that although I loved walking through the forest tracking the primates, I was less interested in standing for hours recording their behaviour. And this led me to my second job in Peru, actually, where I found my area, the thing that really excited me. And it was very similar to Paraguay in terms of I liked walking through the forest, I liked finding animals, and I liked collecting data. But in Peru, I learned that actually I liked to quantify what I was finding. So I'll tell you a little bit about that in a moment. But yeah, I flew for my first paid position, my first job, and it was as mammal team coordinator for an NGO called Fauna Forever in the Peruvian Amazon rainforest. This is a view, beautiful view you get when you fly in. So I started this job in 2015. The job comprised of rapid assessment surveys and baseline data collection of medium and large mammals. So what does that mean on a daily basis? That means camping in an area of rainforest that hadn't been surveyed before. And my job was to go out and collect information on the mammals in the area. But first, I'll show you a little bit about where we lived. We had to construct a tent, a kind of tent camp in the middle of the rainforest using the materials that were around us, led by some really skilled Peruvian construction workers, led by a man called Andreas, who is a genius to build what he did. This was our camp. It looks quite rustic. It was actually very homely in the end. Had a really great atmosphere. There was quite a lot of us working there. It was challenging at times. It was very rainy often, lots of mosquitoes. We spent the first few months in rubber boots because it was just too muddy to wear flip-flops. You can see over to the right some bunk beds. So that's where the majority of people slept. I set up a little tent because I like my own space. And this was my Holly's house. I tried to make a little garden and a yoga area. Yeah, pretty basic. Showering outside is actually really, really nice because the forest is around you. And our loo with a view, as we called it. The journey to this field site could be quite challenging. We would take first the highway, the interoceanic highway, followed by this dirt track, which if it rained could be, as you can see on the right, a bit of a struggle. And that was followed by a boat journey, just a short 20-minute boat journey up to the reserve where I spent much of my first year and a half in Peru. Again, the trails when we first moved in were quite flooded, but by the dry season it was a totally different situation and it was quite pleasant. So my job had two parts really. I collected data, but I also led volunteers and interns and trained them in data collection for medium and large mammals. And I really, really enjoyed that. So I suppose you could also say from this position I learned that I like to teach people. So you can see there on the right, I'm standing on one of the trails that I've cut. In the top left, I'm standing with some of the volunteers who were helping me collect data. So my day-to-day work, we would get up at dawn or just before dawn, eat our breakfast in the dark, and then start what is called a line transect survey, which takes place on a trail, which we had to spend many weeks cutting with machetes first. Then you walk along this trail really slowly, really quietly, and you listen and you look and you record every mammal. So we're talking like anything larger than a squirrel that you see, you record it. You take a measurement of where it was exactly, you record the location, and all of this information can be used afterwards to create a picture of what wildlife is in the area, how much wildlife is in the area, and that can be monitored over time, and it can be compared between different areas. So the NGO I work for compare between, for example, areas used for logging, areas used for Brazil nut collection, areas used for conservation or ecotourism. So you can see here in this photo, I'm walking up front with my clipboard and my machete, and behind me are two volunteers who are helping me look for wildlife. There's a lot of wildlife in the Amazon rainforest. I could talk for hours about the biodiversity there. This photograph here, my friend Harry is imitating a jaguar that I saw in that precise spot, which I am still I've never seen a jaguar since then. I probably won't. It was an incredible sighting. It was very close. It did give me a fright. And it taught me to respect the rainforest. You know, I was quite confident walking on trails by myself, and it was a good reminder that I'm not the biggest animal here. But I was very, very lucky to have that encounter. A lot of wildlife in the Amazon is quite hidden, quite elusive. So it's not like going on a safari where you're going to see all of the large mammals immediately. It takes time, and I actually really enjoy that because you feel the reward. You know, you spend a long time there and you'll get a sighting that you really, really appreciate, rather than if you see something every single day. There are signs of these animals all around. On the left there, that's a tapir footprint on a beach, and on the right, it's a jaguar track. So although we often don't see these animals, we know they're there. The other way we know they're there are by using camera traps, which was the other part of my job. So as well as recording what animals are there and counting them, I also had to try and find evidence of the more elusive animals, the nocturnal animals. You know, you're not going to walk across a jaguar every day, so how do we know they're there? We put up these little cameras and you tie them to a tree, and it will record anything that walks in front of it. So I'm going to show you a minute or two of camera trap images of some of the species that we recorded on this area of land. So this is a mustelid called a tyra, which is like a large weasel, really. There's a third one coming along at the end there. This is a tapir, so this is the animal that left the track I showed you a few slides previously. It's the largest terrestrial mammal in South America. And coming up behind is a juvenile, almost fully grown, but you can just see the remains of some stripes on its stomach, which shows that it's a bit young. This is another tapir here. If you watch the nose, you'll see that the nose moves around. It's a prehensile nose. It's kind of like a short elephant trunk, and they use it to pick up leaves and vegetation. This is an ocelot, one of the more common cats that we capture in camera trap. Really, really pretty animal. And in a moment, yes, this is a pumas. This is one of the two larger cats alongside the jaguar. This is a coati. The males tend to be solitary and the females tend to live in groups. I think he knows the camera is there, but he's not quite sure. Off he goes. This is a jaguar. This is a jaguar walking through that campsite that I showed you some photographs of earlier. This was the year later, we built a more permanent structure. And I just set up a camera trap to see what wildlife was already returning. So that was really cool to see. It's not a great video here, but it's a giant armadillo, which is an endangered species. It is absolutely massive. And the area that it's in, this clearing here, is a leafcutter ant nest, sorry. So the armadillo comes in at night and he digs and digs, like you can see him there, and he'll dig down and eat some leafcutter ants. And this is one of the 2 deer species that are in the area. This is a collared peccary. There are 2 types of peccary there, white-lipped and collared. These collared peccary were quite common on the trails. This is another deer, a little young one, as you can see, with the spots. We only had a few camera traps. I think we had about 6 at this time, and I have hundreds and hundreds of videos of wildlife, so it really does show you how much is around, even though you're not seeing it every day. This is another curious ocelot. Often animals come up and smell the camera traps if you've handled them recently, if you've had insect repellent on your hands or sweat, and they'll smell you. This is another puma. This is a really cool animal called a grice, and it looks a little bit like a honey badger from Africa. Really, really rare to capture in camera. And another big jaguar. So showing camera trap images and videos is something that I love doing, whether it's on exploring by the seat of your pants in local schools or there in Peru to colleagues and to school children. It's such a great way to show what wildlife is around. And I think education, environmental education, exciting people about what is in the land around them is really, really important. I did capture a really cool camera trap video while I was out there of a really elusive species called a short-eared dog. That was published and picked up by Manga Bay. There are 2 species of dogs in the Amazon, and they're both very little studied, not a lot is known about them. The recording that I made was of the short-eared dog eating an armadillo, which was a new recording for science. So after about 1.5 years in Peru, I realised that I needed to kind of improve my academic career at that point. I felt I'd plateaued, I'd learned a lot, but I needed to go away and learn how to analyse my data. So that led me to Wild Crew at the University of Oxford, where I did a postgraduate diploma in international wildlife conservation practice. It was a really unique course. It's residential. There were only 9 of us. We're called Panthers, and an international group of people. So I learned so much just from dinner time conversations with my classmates. I then was awarded a scholarship to stay, and that turned into a job for a few years where I continued to work at Wild Crew for the Trans-Kalahari Predator Programme. And that included 1 month in Zimbabwe, which was amazing. I saw so many animals I've only ever seen on television. And I learned a lot because we deployed a really large-scale camera trap survey. So although I'd used camera traps in the Amazon before, it was more to supplement the species list. This was my first formal training in how to deploy a camera trap group that would give us some serious data that is published and used afterwards. So the picture on the bottom left there is a hyena, and I was so happy to see one in the wild because my job actually back at Wild Crew was to sort through camera trap images of hyenas and assign them individual identities based on their coat patterns. So it was really cool to see one for real. That doesn't mean I've stayed away from the Amazon completely. I was very lucky that my boss at Wild Crew allowed me to return to Peru to the Amazon in the summer, where I work as an expedition guide for Tamandua expeditions. It has mainly a herpetology focus, but I still do mammal walks when people want them. And it allowed me to kind of keep my contacts in the region and keep on top of what was happening in terms of conservation. I think ecotourism is a really valuable tool in conservation if it's done properly. For example, Tamandua expeditions employ people who would otherwise be employed in other lines of work that might not be as safe for them or as profitable or as good for the environment. I also guide students, which is probably my favourite part. This is Radford University. And I particularly love working with other women, obviously some other young upcoming women in science. I think it's really amazing the projects that these students come out and carry out, and I learn a lot from them as well. Just to come back to this, I do think ecotourism is important. I think not everybody can go maybe to the Amazon rainforest to experience it, and that's completely understandable. It is expensive. But I think whether it's at home, whether it's abroad, whether it's just in your backyard, finding something that you're passionate about, finding your little patch of nature that you can enjoy. Because David Attenborough said, no one will protect what they don't care about, and no one will care about what they've never experienced. And I think that is accurate. My job at the moment, since I finished with Wild Crew, I work for the Asir Foundation, which is a US-based nonprofit. They work in Peru in the same area that I've worked for years. They first awarded me a conservation fellowship in 2020 when they found my social media account. And that turned into a position as Director of Research, although due to the pandemic and lack of travel, I mainly manage their social media accounts. However, it's actually, I think, quite an important point to raise. I enjoy social media. I've kind of just played with it for a few years, and somehow that ended up as a proper job. So I think my message there really is, if you enjoy sharing your stories, your conservation stories, don't be scared to do that, because you never know, it might lead to all sorts of other opportunities. And I think conservation can be so competitive when it comes to jobs. It's so underfunded that if you have another skill like social media or writing blogs or anything like that, then it can really help you with your career further down the line. At the moment, I'm in the process of applying for a PhD. That is hopefully the next step in my career, where I can design and carry out a research project back in the Peruvian Amazon with real conservation implications. So hopefully next time I speak to you, I will have started that project. And in the meantime, I just want to finish with a quote from Jane Goodall, who really was the woman in science who inspired me to start this path when I was just 7 years old. And yeah, now I welcome any of your questions. Thank you for listening.
Awesome, Holly. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for taking us into some of your adventures in the Amazon. It truly is an amazing and beautiful place. I can only imagine how much you've learned and experienced from being there, the amazing collaborations, the friendships. It looks like, you know, when you're working in the field, you become really close to the people who you're around. And
yeah,
not surprising, right? You count on them day in and day out.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it. It really, really is. You make the best friends in the world, and people I haven't seen for 2 years, but I still talk to every day. Yeah. All
right. So we have questions already coming in via the chat. Here's the first one here. You mentioned that conservation is competitive. So they're just wondering if you can elaborate a little bit on that. What did you mean by that, and why is it like that?
Yeah. I think what I mean is that there are a lot of people applying for the same jobs in conservation, and it's competitive in the sense that it's so underfunded for starters that you often need to pay for experience or volunteer before you are even going to be considered for a paid position, which if you worked in another field, you would probably graduate and be hired immediately. So it creates great, there's a lot of, it's unfair. You know, it's biased towards people who can afford to pay for these experiences, who have the time to be able to volunteer. So it's really, really difficult to make your way in conservation. I meet a lot of young graduates who do have experience, but they're applying for jobs with hundreds of applicants and they're just not getting anywhere. And another issue is that people with PhDs are often hired for positions that are that don't require a PhD. So like a data management position, there will be so many applicants that people who have PhDs will be hired, and it just makes it really, really hard for people earlier in their career to get somewhere. So I think my advice is always to try and have like a little like side skill that you can try to use to further yourself.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. There's you know, anyone you talk to in science and conservation always talks about how field work is, you know, the most exciting part. It's, you know, lots of work in the office, of course, you're crunching the data after you finish your field work and such, but those times in the field are the most valuable, the most exciting. So it's not surprising at all that there is competition for those positions. And yeah, like you mentioned, there's lots of volunteer positions, which is a great way to get started and maybe establish yourself with some of those organizations. But if you don't have that funding in the first place, it definitely can leave some people behind.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, you spent a lot of time in the field, whether it's on projects like the camera trapping or ecotourism and things like that. So I wonder, in your experiences, have you run into any issues, being a woman in the field? Are there any challenges that have stood out to you, or do you find that once you're out in the field with everybody, it doesn't matter as much?
I think it is definitely more challenging as a woman. It probably varies a lot depending on where you are and what the situation is. I don't want to make a blanket statement,
Right.
but I think in general, depending on what country you're working in and what culture you're surrounded by, proving yourself as a woman can often be a lot more challenging. So I definitely had that challenge in Peru with some of my Peruvian colleagues, because me as a female scientist in that role was kind of not the cultural norm. So even just when it comes down to things like physical ability, there is obviously a limit. So I might not be as strong as some of my male colleagues when it comes to macheting a trail or carrying things. So in some instances, I might have to accept help. But if you accept help too much, then it looks like you can't do anything. So you have to constantly kind of prove that you're physically very, very capable. And yeah, I've had some situations where I was maybe macheting trails and would get left behind, or my machetes would go missing because other people wanted to go machete the trail because they didn't think a woman should be doing it. So it's a difficult kind of balance to find, where you need to show that you want to do this work, that you can do this work, but also you don't want to upset people and you want to respect the culture that you're working in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it looks like from some of the images you shared, you do get to work and meet some amazing women in the field as well. So it's great to see that there's colleagues and young scientists, conservationists who are kind of making a name for themselves as well, and proving that they can do that work and be out there in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of those women help lift each other up, which I think is really great. There's a great community of female conservationists out there.
Awesome. Well, one more question here. You talked about ecotourism and some of the guiding you've done. So what do you think responsible ecotourism looks like?
Big question. I think, again, probably it's context specific, but a few general things would be, it absolutely needs to benefit the local people in the local community. You cannot go into an area and just make money and leave. It needs to first and foremost be benefiting that community, that area. So for example, providing alternative livelihoods, I think, is really important. Ecotourism does provide a lot of jobs for a lot of people. Those jobs should be fairly paid and compensated. So it can be very, very valuable. Some other rules, again, just respect, general respect. If tour groups are going through communities, it's not an opportunity just to go and take photos of people living their normal lives. So I think a lot of cultural respect has to be there as well. But yeah, the big takeaway is it has to benefit the local community, and it has to be something that people in that country and area want there.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And done properly, it does provide great livelihood for those in the community. It can help, steer people away from putting too much pressure on natural resources when there's the incentive to protect the area. Nobody wants to destroy the place that they live, right? Nobody wants
exactly
to do that. But sometimes circumstance, when it's about survival, circumstance leads to things like that. So yeah, definitely responsible. Definitely with Indigenous communities and their voices heard and having a real role in that ecotourism. Awesome. Well, Holly, I'm always great to host you. Always great to have you joining us. It's exciting to hear that you'll hopefully be getting back out into the field soon. I know that COVID has changed a lot of things for people getting out into the field, but it sounds to me like you'll be back there soon, back where you love to be, and maybe getting in on some of that camera trapping action again. So I think that might be my final question for today is, with the camera traps, what kind of unique behaviors have you been able to observe that you wouldn't otherwise be able to, because these animals are so elusive?
Yeah, I mean, some of it can just be quite basic, recording the presence of an animal in an area that you wouldn't normally expect it to be or hasn't been recorded before. Going back to the short-eared dog recording, that was really interesting because I found a dead armadillo, and I put a camera trap there, and a short-eared dog came and scavenged the meat. And that was not known, had not been published before. It was thought that these dogs ate fish and seeds. So that was like a cool dietary behavior, I suppose, that had been recorded on a camera trap. And I'm sure there's a lot more out there that people have recorded. I think a lot of new species range is always found on camera traps. Definitely species that are not normally in areas or interacting with other species. You might see, I think a friend of mine recorded 2 species of monkey that normally compete highly with each other, recorded them in the same area eating clay from a mineral lick. So that was quite interesting as well.
All right, very cool. Well, Holly, again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for kicking off day 3. Hopefully you can tune into a little bit more that is happening today. And yeah, I can't wait for our next connection with students, maybe even live from the field. Should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that would be amazing, hopefully.
All right. Well, Holly, enjoy your Sunday. I know it's afternoon for you. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk soon.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me. Bye, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, Holly. Okay, let's continue along here. Before we jump into our next speaker, I want to spend just a little time sharing a clip with you. So I mentioned Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants at the beginning and the amazing classroom events that we do host. So I want to share a couple clips with you from some of those classroom experiences. So a lot of the events that we run for classrooms, we might have the scientists that explore in their home, their office, their lab. Maybe we're live from an aquarium or a zoo. Maybe we're out in the field with a good 4G connection. But we also have these great satellite units. They're about the size of a textbook. And we send those satellite units around the world, the scientists and explorers. And then they can broadcast from some of the most remote places on the planet. So I'm going to share little clips, give you an example or two of what that kind of looks like. So this first one here is in Botswana with an explorer named Andrew Stein. And I'll just let the clip speak for itself, and then I'll pop back in a second. So let me play this clip now.
Stein, we're here live in northern Botswana. We just started 2 lions. So we're finishing up our full biomedical workup. So we collected blood samples, tissue samples, we've taken measurements. I'm here with Dr. Florian Weisse, Pro Tomaletso, Dr. Eric Verrain, and Chris Dembende. And we're part of the Pride in Our Prides team. So we're here in northern Botswana studying the ecology and conflict of lions in the region. So one of the things that we do as part of this project is to put satellite tracking collars on the cats. You can see the collars here. We have the battery pack below, and then the GPS satellite unit on top. And so these units help us determine where the cats move, but they also are key to our alert system. So they have a line of coordinates programmed into the collar called a geofence. That geofence gives us a warning when the cats actually approach the village, and we'll get a text message on our phone. And then we can relay that message via text to people in the village to make sure that they're safe and that their livestock are protected when the lions are coming close by. Right now we've got a female and a male. They were actually associating together and mating earlier. So we darted the 2 of them together so that we can keep track of them separately when they move apart. So I think the team is nearly ready to wrap up. So we're going to give a reversal agent so that they wake up and they're able to move about their business. But I just wanted to check in quickly and let people know a little bit about what we're doing, the exciting work that we have here in northern Botswana. So tune in later and find out more about our work with the Claus Conservancy.
All right, so that's just an example of some of the work that we do, some of the cool stuff we can bring live into classrooms. So our next speaker is coming up now, and so it's going to be Erica Bergman. So Erica is currently quarantining for some field work. So she's in the Middle East, and I don't see her joining us right now. So I'm thinking that maybe there was a time zone mix-up or something else. But lucky for us, we've had Erica join us many times for programs in the past, and I have a video queued up here, and I am going to share that with everybody now. So bear with me for 1 second while I load up the video, and then we'll get to explore some of Erica's work. Here we go.
Have an amazing presenter coming up. She is a mechanical engineer. She's a scuba pilot. She is just fantastic in all ways. Erica Bergman is joining us. Make sure her mic.
Am I off mute now?
No, you are good to go. I accidentally unmuted you, but now you're unmuted. So where are we talking to you from?
I'm in Victoria, BC, Canada.
Oh, nice.
And for the very first time, we have not only one snowflake, but we have about a foot of snow outside. And I don't know if you know this, but we are not a snow town. This is the West Coast. So everyone's freaking out. And I'm hunkered in with about a foot and a half of snow in my car, which I have literally never seen before.
So you're getting a unique winter experience for Vancouver, British Columbia, which is
I am. It feels a little bit East Coast, which I don't know. West Coast, best coast, man. You know, West Coast.
Well, I mean, I would beg to differ, but that's just we all have our favorites. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up your presentation because I'm curious to learn what you've been working on, and more about what you do beyond. Because I have a feeling it's more than just scuba piloting. I mean, there's some robotics and a bunch of other things. That's scuba. Sorry, submarine piloting. I apologize.
That's all right. There was that one scuba event, so I forgive you.
Well, and I imagine it's are you scuba certified, or is that not something you have to do to do the piloting?
I am, but I'm spoiled, right? I'm a dive diva. I have a machine that carries all of the equipment for me. It keeps me warm and dry. I can eat a granola bar and talk to my friends. So why would I ever go scuba diving?
So that's the new title I think I'm going to use whenever I get to introduce you now, is just Dive Diva. I hope you're okay with that. Okay, great. We've decided it here, everyone. She's a Dive Diva.
Her deepness is taken, so I'll take Dive Diva.
That's fair. That's a good one. All right. Well, I will let you get to telling everyone all about what you do as a Dive Diva.
Yeah.
And we'll check back in afterward with some questions. So if you have questions, of course, please everyone comment and let Erica know.
So I'm going to try and concisify to kind of get us back on track. But my plan is to talk for about 20 minutes and just have submarine story time, and then answer hopefully any and all questions you have about the ocean. So as promised, I've got fishes and sharks and crocs and some more. So let me just, oopsies, sneak preview. Let me just blow this up here. So as Wes mentioned, I am a submarine pilot, and I know that's a very odd job title. And most people, the first question they ask is, how did you get into that? And the short answer is through the hatch. And the long answer is, I actually started out, I wanted to be an astronaut. Who doesn't lay in the grass at night and look up at the stars and, wish that they could go up there? But, as a young woman, kind of living in a very terrestrial existence, feeding cows, laying in the barnyard, looking up at the stars, dreaming of being an astronaut, I didn't really think that there were people who explored the deep ocean. I thought that explorers only climbed mountains and went to space. So that's where my head was. And then I learned some interesting facts about space exploration, which totally changed my mind. So the moon is mapped in such high definition that you could see if you could see if a dollar bill was on the ground, if it was a 1, a 5, a 10, or another denomination. That's how tightly we can see the moon. And on Mars, if you were looking at Google Maps, you could tell what was a house and what was a building and what was a swimming pool. That's about the resolution that we have Mars mapped. In the ocean, we only have mapped in these big swaths. So you could see the difference between a city block and a giant pond, but you can't see any tighter resolution than that for the whole ocean. I decided, well, gosh, sounds like they need some explorers. And so I worked my way into submarines. I mean, it's a very small industry. And the very first time that I saw one, it was in the basement of my building at the University of Washington. I was going downstairs as a good little scientist to get a bucket of dry ice. And there was this yellow submarine with these 2 huge clear windows and a ladder up to the top of it. And I just decided then and there that the heavens opened up and the angels started singing and the light shone down on the submarine. And I knew I was destined to be a submarine pilot. It's my dream job, and I never look back. And I've had some pretty extraordinary experiences down there. So I've had a chance to fly. We call it flying, a lot of different submarines. And the reason we call it flying is, unlike driving a car, where all you have control of really is left, right, forward, and backwards, so 2 dimensions, a submarine's a lot more like a helicopter, where you have this 3rd dimension of up and down and tilt and trim in a lot of different angles. So we call it flying or piloting submarines. And as much as I love piloting submarines, I love telling the stories of what they do. And so I like making films. Sorry, I've got my notes here. I like making films, and I like sharing the stories behind submarines as much as I like piloting them, because we can go as close as we want to what we see underwater. We can go check out tiny little things. Like this is he's called a blenny, and it's a fish. If you hold up your pinky fingernail and you look at your pinky fingernail, it's about the length of your fingernail. They're really, really tiny. And we just get in there with the submarine and we get our cameras, our macro cameras up close, and we take pictures of these little guys. But not everything in the ocean is little. Some things in the ocean are real big. So this is a buddy of mine, actually, Randy. He's in Guadalupe, and they are diving with great white sharks. And let me tell you something about the ocean. It is just as curious about you as you are about it. And so we get lots of visitors underwater. And these sharks, so this was a couple of years ago, and these sharks were so interested in the submarines that I'm still buffing scratches off the windows. Not from the sharks, running into the submarine. They just get really, really close and then brush along the window. And their skin is covered in these, they're called dermal denticles, but these, scales, for lack of a better term, and they're quite sharp on the edges. And they just leave hairline fractures along our nice, precious, clear windows. So all these years later, the sharks have still left their mark. And sharks are really fun underwater because they have a sensor in their snout, which can detect electricity. And so a submarine is an electric vehicle. And so, of course, we have a little bit of electrical signal that is coming off the submarine into the water. So the sharks get really interested, and they're wondering, they notice this signal, and it's a lot bigger than a fish. So they know that they don't want to eat it, but they also have no idea what it is. So they got to come in for a closer look. The ocean is very fun, full of a lot of various curious creatures, and you really have to know how to interact with them. And so as much as I'm in the submarine, sometimes I'm outside the submarine, swimming or scuba diving to make films about the deep ocean or the shallow ocean. And you have to learn how to interact with these creatures. So one creature that I had to learn particularly how to spend time with was the sky. So this is a crocodile. It's an American crocodile in Cuba, and his name is Nino. And as you can see, Nino has some really great dental work going on. I mean, just on point, very shiny, very white. Look at those gums. He looks very healthy. So Nino is this crocodile, and he doesn't necessarily want to eat you, but he's not that discerning. I mean, if you put your hand out, he might try and take a nibble. So what you learn with Nino is to keep the camera entirely between you and him. And he'll come up and he'll open his mouth and he's kind of exploring you, and he'll just bounce off of things. Not necessarily bite down, but he'll bounce off you. So this was Nino trying to fit my camera in his mouth. Didn't quite make it, but gave me the jeebies. So it's situations like these and stories like these underwater that I feel so grateful that I get to have them, and I am so committed to sharing them. And one thing, I'm really into tech and I'm really into camera engineering. So one thing I love is the idea of 360 video and virtual reality. And so I decided that one of the most important things that I could do would be to share these stories in a way that felt like you were having that story in real time for yourself. So a couple years ago, last year, 2 years ago, who knows, who cares? We took one of our submarines and mounted these really fancy underwater 360 film cameras all over the submarine, inside, outside, hanging off all over the place. And we made a film of a dive underwater in the beautiful glass sponge reefs of Howe Sound. So I'm going to give you a little preface and we're going to watch a bit of it. So this is what it's going to look like. These are the sponges. Now, I just want you to keep in mind that what I'm showing you is a 360 video unfolded. So it's like looking at a map of the world. It's a circle and it's just been peeled open. So it's going to look stretched in the corners, but just imagine that you're seeing it in 360. So Wes, if you wouldn't mind, will you share a little tidbit of a dive underwater? Very galactic underwater. As soon as you leave the surface, everything gets really, really still and calm and quiet. And you sort of sink down to the bottom, hundreds of feet underwater. I think for a lot of people on their first dive, there's this sense of fear because it is deep and it's dark and we're not used to be surrounded by so much darkness. But then you turn the lights on and this whole world
look at this, guys. Look up.
opens up in front of you. You instantly lose your fear because it's just way too cool. It's way too cool to be scared of. It's epic. So that's a little piece of a dive underwater. And if you want to see the whole thing, that 360 video will be available online. It's one of the things that I like to produce to help take people underwater. So you'll see that whole story. It's about 5.5 minutes long, and it's going to take you 500 feet deep on the glass sponge reefs in Howe Sound in Canada, up here where I live. So along the lines of sharing what I get to do with other people, the job itself is really fun, but it's also a lot of hard work. Oops, I got to reshare here. Oh, give me 1 second. Of course, Keynote has to crash.
Not a big deal. We got a good look at some video. We got to go swimming with you and like see glass sponges. I mean, that's pretty freaking cool.
Well, I've got it back up again.
Okay, there we go. I'm going to grab it for you. We're good to go. And it is all you again to tell us more about, what you're doing and glass sponges maybe. What are those?
Yeah. Okay, so oopsies. Let's go back to the great white. Okay, so we're on these glass sponges, and it is a really incredible experience. And there are so many dive sites all over the world that are worth exploring. And so one of them that we're working on right now, which is very exciting, is actually in the Bahamas. So this is the little submarine that I pilot in the Bahamas. Its name is Nemo, and it has a matching identical sibling called Nomad. So when we're diving in the Bahamas, we dive on this bank. It's called the tongue of the ocean. And if you look at a map of the deep ocean, you'd think of the Bahamas and the Caribbean in general as quite shallow, but there's this piece of the ocean that's very deep that swings up into the Bahamas. And when you have really deep ocean and a wall and very shallow ocean, it means that all these deep sea creatures come up the wall to eat things. So it's this really, really incredible dive site. And we're setting up an operation. We're going to be there potentially for a whole year. As soon as kind of COVID settles down, we'll start taking people on dives again. Right now we're setting it up, but it's been really fun. It's a lot of long hours. So this is Nemo and Nomad. On deck, I would say probably somewhere around midnight. We've finished diving for the night. We're doing the post dives on the submarines, which is not a very glamorous job. And then we're getting ready to pre-dive them again and put them back in the water in the morning. And I really love all of my coworkers. I've had the best experience being a submarine pilot. But one of the greatest things about this new project in the Bahamas is we needed a new pilot. And I got to pick my new trainee. And so for the first time ever, my co-pilot is another chick. So we brought on board another mechanical engineer out of San Francisco. She works on robotics, and she's a marine engineer. And she's been training as a submarine pilot. And I'm very, very excited to spend a year having another woman on board. It's, you know, it's not male dominated because women are pushed out. I think it's just because women don't think, hey, why don't I go work on a ship? Why don't I pilot something? Why don't I become a deep ocean engineer? And so it's been really fun to bring a whole network of people that I admire down underwater with me. And so you might think, oh, well, this must be really unattainable. How could I ever become a submarine pilot? Well, I'm going to show you something, and you're going to see it, and you're going to be like, oh, yeah, I could definitely be a submarine pilot. So take a look at this. Do you recognize it? Yeah, it's a Playboy, what do you call it? PlayStation gamepad controller. It's just a Xbox controller. And there is a little bit more skill involved than just the PlayStation controller. But essentially, if you see that and you feel good about it, you could probably be a submarine pilot. So there's a whole group of young people that I want to bring into the world of ocean exploration, which is why I started this program I'm really excited about called Girls Underwater Robot Camp. And I teach girls how to build underwater robots at camp. So I'm teaching them everything that I can think of about becoming a submarine pilot. I'm teaching them basic engineering. We get really into the weeds about how propellers work and how manipulator arms work and what a hydraulic piston is. They learn some computer programming in Python. They learn welding and how to use laser cutters and 3D printers, and they build this underwater robot, which is actually capable of going 300 feet deep. So it's not a toy. It's a real scientific piece of equipment that they can build themselves. And then drive it around underwater. And look, there's that controller again. So you start with an ROV, a remotely operated vehicle. You move into submarines, no big deal. So that's, it's one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life is getting to share this and bringing people into the world that it's not outside your reach. And so one thing, the way that I like to leave this always is to show people a way that they can do what we do. And so one thing that I really like to push is this early career grant. The way that you become, you know, an explorer, if you want to join National Geographic, they don't come find you. It's not a recruitment process. You apply. And so I really encourage people that are curious, that want to get involved, that want to become submarine pilots or explore mountains or explore rainforests, anything, to apply for grants. There's a bunch of them out there for explorers. And please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about being an explorer or submarine pilot, and I would just absolutely love to talk about it.
Well, thank you, Erica, for taking us on that dive with you. Really had a lot of fun seeing your world and getting to come with you. So what I learned from this is that basically every time my mom was like, stop playing video games, you're not going to learn anything, she was wrong.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to call mom. And
everything in moderation.
Well, of course, but like there's some skills I was learning. I could have been a submersible pilot minus the fact that I'm probably a little tall, maybe a little heavy.
Hey, lead on legs, that's what we call it. Because if you don't have heavier people in the submarine, it just means you have to carry more bags of lead. So
I'm as useful to you as a bag of lead. Noted. Got it. That again, this has been a great, learning so much. I can play video games, and I'm as useful as a
That's
Bag
a
of
bag
lead.
of lead.
So we have one question from Fallon Willis, and she asks, what's your favorite sea creature?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I'm torn because there's my answer and
Okay.
there's somebody else's answer, which is way better.
Okay.
My answer is a lobster, which sounds boring, but a lobster can live virtually forever. Their cells regenerate every 7 years. And unless they get killed, they could like live forever. And before we ate a lot of lobsters, there's this thing called deep sea gigantism, which means exactly what it sounds like. Things that live a long time get huge. So lobsters used to be gigantic. Those ones have all just been eaten at this point. But anyway, I love lobsters. But if you ask Sylvia Earle, her deepness, mother of all submarine pilot, she will tell you that her favorite sea creature is a human being, which is a pretty great answer because we are 95% saltwater and we are definitely sea creatures.
And see, I took that as like she loves seeing us in the water and diving and getting to know it. Having met Sylvia quite a few times, I feel like that's her message is get out there and like be in the water and get to know it.
Yeah. So your options for that are lobster or human being.
I mean, they can regenerate. We haven't figured that out yet. So Seriously. I'm going to say that's pretty cool just to, thinking about that. So if you're going to be in the Bahamas, are you planning on making any more VR videos, any more things that we could be able to check out or feel like we're going diving with you?
Yeah, well, I'm just sort of trying to decide right now what we're basically building this substation from scratch, and so it can be anything we want. And I'm trying to decide right now between having like a live camera underwater so you can watch the submarine go and come back,
That's
or
so cool.
maybe just being really active on TikTok and doing lots of videos on TikTok, or making a little web series. I don't know. It's up in the air. If anyone wants to make a recommendation about what kind of content they'd like, now is the time for input.
Yeah, if you got stuff in the comments, because I'm thinking underwater TikTok dance challenges in the submarine bubble. Who's going to be able to top that? I mean, I feel like that's sub-step. See, this is what you got. It's all figured out. So this is what happens here at Women Blaze Trails. We, find you got problems or questions, and we find solutions from some of the best that there is, the best scientists, best explorers, adventurers, and storytellers. And that I want to say thank you, Erica, for spending time with us today. I was just
thank you.
Great to see you and chat a little bit.
Yeah, and I hope you all felt like you got to go on a little dive.
I mean, I know I did. I felt like it was great to have that video clip because you really got to feel like that moment where someone reaches out through the dome is just so cool. So as someone who's not scuba trained, I think I'm going to have to come for a dive with you sometime, maybe down in the Bahamas once we can all travel again.
Please do.
Well, until we see you again, thank you so much. And we'll talk with you soon.
Stay tuned for Gracie.
All right. So a great event there with Erica. If you would like to follow some of Erica's work, I'm going to share her handles right now. So you can find her on Twitter at Erica_Bergman, or you can find her on Instagram at the Erica Bergman. And then I have to point out that was my friend Wes Delavola there who was hosting that event for us. And he also runs an amazing organization called Meridian Treehouse. And I want to take a moment here to share the link to that there. You can also find it on the front page of the Women Blaze Trails Festival. He's doing amazing things in the space of immersive technology, the education space, bringing some really cool things to classrooms. So do check them out. And obviously a huge thank you to Wes for his help with the festival through things like social media and connecting us with great speakers. All right, our next speaker is coming up very shortly, but before we bring her in, I would like to just remind everybody that this weekend is made possible through some support from Lenovo EDU. So as we know, Lenovo is an amazing tech company producing things like tablets and laptops, but they're building an amazing community for educators, for parents, for students, for anybody who's curious about science and exploration. You can explore and visit the community there. And I'm going to play a little sizzle reel here before we talk a little bit more about it, and then all right, so do check out the community. There are communities in the UK and Australia as well. It's a great spot for like-minded educators connect, work with each other, collaborate, find some incredible resources. It's a great spot for parents, a great spot for students, and like I mentioned, a great spot for anyone who's curious and wants to check out some exciting resources featuring explorers, scientists, adventurers, and then our events as well from this weekend will be featured in the community. One more share before we jump to our next speaker. As I mentioned before, Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants, we are all about bringing science, adventure, exploration, and conservation live into classrooms everywhere. And I do want to share a cool little promo with you here, and then I'll bring Lo-Sing in and we'll have a good little chat together. So here we go. Let me share that promo.
I'm explorer and adventurer George Karunas, and when I explore, I do it by the seat of my pants.
So we often ask people when they're in the field to shoot little promos for us and probably make them feel pretty silly when they say, when I explore, I do it by the seat of my pants. And I know that probably looks a lot like a green screen, but I can assure you that's George Karunas. He's a Canadian adventurer and explorer. And I asked him to do one when he was on a volcano in Vanuatu. And so I thought, you know, he's going to do it from his tent or something, right? Or maybe the crater of the volcano, maybe up at the top, the summit. No, he lowers himself on a rappel 400 plus meters down to the lava lake. There's only 4 or 5 spots like this in the world with an open lava lake like that. He was in his heat suit there, almost looking kind of like a bit of a baked potato. And he did that incredible promo for us. I don't know how that'll be topped. Maybe we can get one from the space station one day. I don't know. But yeah, pretty amazing. So let's jump into our next speaker. I'm so excited. Born a Tibetan refugee in India and raised in Canada, we have Dr. Lo-Sing Ravagi joining us. She is the first Tibetan to hold a PhD in feminist anthropology. She's also the first Tibetan Commonwealth scholar and National Geographic explorer. In 1998, she and her sister co-founded Mahichik with their parents as a nonprofit whose mission is to grow a global community committed to a stronger future for Tibet. In 20 plus years, she has helped mentor and support education for thousands of people. So I'm going to bring her in live with us right now. I'm so excited. Lo-Sing, how are we doing today?
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone.
All right. Well, it's so great to see you. It's been a minute since we've connected. I'm sure that you've been very, very, very busy, up to all sorts of amazing things in the education space. But yeah, what I'd like to do, if you're up for it, is let you take over for a bit. Let us get to know you a little bit better. And then I bet we'll have a few questions.
Wonderful, Joe. Thank you and your team for the wonderful work you do ongoing. It's an honor to be here and among all these other speakers as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So I hope this is going to connect.
Yeah, we'll give the screen share a go, and I have your presentation as a backup. So if we can't get it going, I'll pop it up. Either way, we're gonna check it out. As you're sharing, that first option for entire screen tends to be the best option for going full screen.
Right. I think I'll ask you to share the screen, Joe. Yeah. It's not coming up on my end. I apologize.
No worries at all.
Okay.
Technology, right? Sometimes it goes nice and smoothly, or other times you have to kind of finesse it a little bit, but that's why we have these backups. So just bear with me for a moment. I'm going to share my entire screen. I'll bring the presentation up. You tell me if it looks okay once I go full screen.
That's great.
And then if you just hit next slide, tell me next slide, I will transition us.
Okay, wonderful. That looks great. Wonderful. So thank you everyone for joining today. It's Sunday 10 a.m. here, and I'm on the in the city of Kawartha Lakes in Canada. It's about minus 25 degrees Celsius. I think that's a minus 11 Fahrenheit here. So I hope you're all warm and safe. So as Joe mentioned, my heritage, my background is Tibetan as well as Canadian. I live in the US usually, and we have had the tremendous privilege, life-changing privilege of the opportunity to explore how to build empathy in a very uncertain context and place in the world, which is Tibet, through the powerful avenue of education. This is why I so admire what Joe and his team are doing, what Wesley does, etc. is their commitment, lifelong commitment to education, and we share that passion. So the story of Machik's work is very interesting, I think, because we had no training or preparation to do this kind of exploration. Truly by the seat of our pants. I completely concur with that observation and experience shared by so many other explorers. It was really a labor of love. It was a leap of love, not just a leap of faith. In 1987, our parents took us to Tibet for the first time. I was a teenager, so that dates my age. But by 1998, we decided, there is now a small window of opportunity to go inside Tibet, not just in diaspora, but actually inside Tibet, which is now under the PRC, to actually deliver Tibetan language, mother tongue-based bilingual education to rural Tibetans. So many people, so many told us this was not possible. But as I said, as a leap of love, leap of faith, we began the first step without any sort of guarantee of success, without formal training, because what we've done in the last 4 years exactly has not been done before. So other people to whom I look up to have done wonderful work of education inside Tibet that we so admire, but very few diaspora Tibetans go back. And our project is unique in that, next slide. We have truly tried to think long-term at every stage, not just in terms of 1 year, 2 year, 5, even 10-year project, but to think, okay, in 50, 60, 70 years, what are the impacts that we truly hope to have? And in one particular village, happens to be my father's village. Next slide. And it is on the very, very far eastern edge of the Tibetan plateau. And I like to think of the region in geological terms, because when you look at the map as the plateau, you realize Tibet is defined by this incredible 14,000 foot elevation. And indeed, our school is at the bottom of a valley, which is about 13,000 feet. So for us, that's the lowland. Next slide. And these are the people who originally inspired me and continue to inspire me. My sister, in the middle of all those young girls that she was mentoring in Tibet, Dr. Tashi Rabji, and then my parents, the couple on your left. My father and mother, Pencho and Tsering, they were the ones who decided in 1998 to invest all of my father's retirement savings that he had saved up until then into building the first Chumba primary school. Next slide. And we understood that there was a problem, a tremendous challenge to meet. In 1987, when we first re-engaged with our community there. This was the school that the local authorities, the local education authorities, had built for a community of 5,000 people. Can you imagine? There were maybe 20, 25 students learning here, basically relearning the same things every day. This is not, I think, by any standard, what parents would get excited about for education for their children. But this is what existed. And so over many years and many long conversations and a complex set of conditions, which I can explain to anyone who would like to hear more about it outside of the conference, we were able to get permission. This was a lot of hard work, a lot of persistence, and some luck. A lot of community support went into making this possible in a very uncertain region of the world. And next slide. And with all that support from, inside Tibet, from just so many places outside Tibet, this is the school that we were able to produce. So on your left is the primary school, on the right is the middle school. We now have about 850 students boarding full time. And as I mentioned, the medium of instruction is Tibetan language. I cannot emphasize how important this is for our future, for our 50, 60, 70-year timeline. We need young Tibetans learning their own language, not as a second language, but as the medium of instruction. They are also, from day one, also learning Mandarin, and we are trying very hard to introduce them to some English as much as we can, to a third language. I believe children all over the world are capable of learning multiple languages at the same time. Some of the languages may take a few years to master, but eventually they get there. And indeed, these children of farmers and pastoralists, none of the parents had even a grade 6 education. These children in the first year became first in the countywide testing, standardized testing, that's what they do over there, in Tibetan language. By the time they graduated grade 6, they were top in both Tibetan and Chinese. Very unusual for rural students to achieve this. And the only reason this happened is not because our students are any brighter than any other kids anywhere in the world. It's because it was a collective multi-stakeholder approach. And this is what we learned. It wasn't enough just to care about these kids. They happened to be from my father's village, the only place we get permission to work. But it wasn't enough just to care about them or their parents. We had to really think about the context that they're in and to think deeply about all the stakeholders involved and how each of them sees the situation, how each of them operates, and how the consequences of any action for each of these multiple stakeholders. So it really was a profound eye-opener. I did my PhD. I'm grateful for the opportunity. I did it in London, England, and University of London. I learned so much, but this was 10 times harder. This was real life with real people and real consequences. And we were truly exploring, not just in terms of how do I do a good program and produce results, but in each of us on the team, there's so many of us working together at Machik. Each of us, we had to dig inside ourselves and figure out, how do I have empathy, not just for the students? That's easy. It's easy to care about kids. It's easy to care about their academic achievement. How do we care about everybody involved? That was much harder. That was much more difficult, even before getting to the caring, just to see everyone's different contexts. And I really was encouraged and guided to do this by my parents, my sister, other people who advised us along the process, and just through sheer exposure, really seeing how local teachers, the parents, the people already trying to provide education, what were their limitations, constraints, what was working, what was not working. So all of this was sort of the baseline, but on top of that, we tried our best to travel and to live and to speak as locals do, and to speak the local, of course, Tibetan language, but even the local dialects. We had to learn a new dialect. And thank goodness for my father's capacity. He already knew the local dialect, but my sister and I had to learn it. My mother's sister and I had to learn it. Others had to do the same. But I think above all, the process of building that local empathy with the local, not just the kids and their parents, but the whole education context was long-term commitment. It is so often the case with the Sustainable Development Goals. The goals sound awesome. They look great on paper. It is 10 times harder to actually put them into real life and to see a project through over 25 years instead of just 5 years. And so where we started with students in kindergarten, we made a promise to the parents many, many years ago to deliver not just a kindergarten education or even grade 6. The parents, they themselves didn't go to school, but they could tell that wasn't enough. That wasn't going to fundamentally change their future of their communities. So we made that promise, and it was scary. It was scary to make a promise on delivering something not for 1 or 2 of my own kids, but for hundreds of children of other people. It was a very eye-opening process and took many people inside Tibet, outside Tibet to make that all possible. But through time, we were able to see it through. And by 2018, the first cohort of Chungpa students, the one who had done so well in their testing, they actually graduated college. And about 35 of them are now teachers in the county where we built the school. So, and we love teachers. We love teachers. So, and they're so proud. Their parents are so proud. And they're seeing their young people, proud of their farming and pastoral roots, but also very high capacity in being able to pass on the language. And through that, there's a much higher potential to continue the culture. We know this from examples all around the world. So on that level, what we're doing is nothing new. I think what we're doing that's different is we're working in such an area of uncertainty, of great challenge. And my takeaway today is the importance of really searching inside ourselves to figure out how do we listen to people across a great cavernous gap. How do we build the internal strength and desire to sit and listen deeply long enough to someone to understand what their challenges are and what the possible, the Venn diagram overlap. How do we possibly find those spots, even if they're very small in the beginning, and grow those over time? So we are grateful to everybody, and there's just so many names of real people who have who've taken a risk, who've put in extra time, donors included, but so many just people who have shared their knowledge and their networks of people to make education possible. And it is not just about one village. The school has now become a center point in a ripple effect, improving and influencing principals, teachers, students, education administrators, far beyond this one little village high up in the mountains in the local area. So many challenges currently, many challenges will come. And what we know from our little bit of experience is that all of this is only going to change when we truly do the thing that's harder sometimes, to not just have a sort of game plan for a program. Of course you do that, but to really select challenges sometimes that seem impossible. We will need to work with a team that also shares that passion and really challenge ourselves internally as well. So I hope that makes some impact on trying to understand a different kind of exploration. When people find out that we work in Tibet, they're often assumed that, we're climbers or exploring something in that way. But we are really about trying to figure out how to, build a stronger future for Tibet, how to be a little bit of make a small contribution to that process, and how to grow a global community that cares about, continues to care about Tibet into the future. Along the way, I'll end on another positive note. Along the way of doing this education, we have had the great privilege and honor of working with incredible change makers inside Tibet. This was truly, when I think back to the beginning of the work, an unexpected joy, an unexpected privilege. Because we were doing work in a way that was not just on a 2 to 5 year time plan, we were slowly able to meet some of the most inspiring human beings I've met anywhere. These are Tibetans inside Tibet who are making changes in HIV/AIDS education, in women's empowerment, and especially many in conservation. And one I will mention is Bazang, Kunchak Bazang. He is a pastoralist, born and bred. His entire family lineage are pastoralists in Tibet, primarily yak herding. And he was the first in his village to ever get a college education. And while he could have had a very comfortable life in an urban setting, he chose instead to go back to Tibet. Back to his village, to his pastoral area, and began working very closely, again, in a multi-stakeholder approach with his community to come up with a plan to counter desertification. There was a huge problem in his area of grassland becoming deserts. And so over time, with the local people's own strategic plan, their own ideas, thank you, Joe. They were able to take what you see as a small example of their larger project. April 2012 is an image of Bazan and his pastoral community members planting grass in a very particular way, in a very particular, with a particular strategy in April of 2012. And by August, on sandy soil, they were able to produce this kind of result. I had to see this for myself, and I went all the way. It's quite far from the village, but I traveled the 2 days it took to get to his area, and I never thought that seeing grass would make me cry. But what they've done is not just the end result. It is the entire process through which they got to the end result, with the community leading. And it was his initial challenge to himself to build that empathy, to be able to take a multi-stakeholder approach in an uncertain context. So there are so many examples of people like Bazan who inspire us every day, and they are all over the world. I hope that you will be able to take heart from this and understand that there are, when we all face so many very collective global challenges, it takes everyone looking around at what they can do with their own lives, with what we have, with the communities and resources and knowledge that we have to make a difference. Thank you.
All right, let me just come back from my screen share here. There we go. Perfect. Wow. Thank you so much. What an amazing project. What a difference it's made. And you know, the from that first school to after to what's been built is just absolutely incredible. So, you know, a huge kudos to you, your sister, your family, and that vision, right? Of your parents to kind of take those retirement savings and believe in something so strongly, to take that giant leap. And I think that's been a theme we've seen all weekend, is taking risks, following your passions, not listening to people saying why, like Sylvia Earle said on Friday night. Why not? That's the question you should ask, is why not?
Right. Absolutely, Joe. I mean, kudos to Sylvia. My goodness, massive appreciation there. I feel extremely lucky because our parents took my sister and I to Tibet in 1987, as I mentioned, and I met my cousins. You know, in our culture, your cousin is like your sibling. We're very close, closely linked. And none of my cousins, all of them, had even a fourth grade education. And so it was profoundly eye-opening, because my sister and I were dead set on college education. My parents made sure of that. Even though, you know, we come from a working class background, it was expected of us by our parents, and there was no opportunity from people like my cousins. And we realized, my God, I am no smarter. I am no more deserving. There's nothing that makes me different from them. And they are now still full-time farming, most of them full, and some of them part-time pastoral as well. And so they all missed the opportunity for an education. Many of their children have gone to the Chungba school, in fact, along with hundreds of other people's children. But that made me and my sister and I realize how important it is to empathize, not just with our own family, but to extrapolate to rural Tibet, rural anywhere, to underprivileged anywhere. And that has really, that was the first lesson in the empathy, is to realize the sameness of us all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love, as you were telling some of those stories, how students have now themselves gone on to become educators. And I think that is so exciting, because now they're taking that knowledge and they're passing it on to the next generation, and they're doing it locally and right in the communities. That's so exciting.
Absolutely, doing it in their mother tongue and bilingually, which is also important. And we know they will face challenges. We're not pretending at all that it's going to fix everything, but it's absolutely going to put them in a better position to make better decisions for their communities. Yeah,
no question. So, I mean, my big question now is what are you working on now? What's next? What I'm sure there's always ideas, right? I think that's what kind of happens, is things start and you never stop kind of thinking of ideas. You never stop asking why not, or what's next.
Right. Well, thank you, Joe. We've been blessed with great team members over the years, staff who've worked with us and gone on to do other things, and the new staff, so many wonderful volunteers. And we've all continued to take that same initial sort of energy and point of empathy, and the work has, I guess, transmogrified as the changing conditions have led us to pivot inside Tibet. Many challenges, not the pandemic was kind of another digital challenge, but we're sort of used to having to pivot all the time. Right. But we have grown our global work quite a bit in the last few years, doing programs such as the Much Gender Summit, the Kabda program, which is an educational program to learn about cultural change makers inside Tibet. We have an annual event called Machik Fest, to which you and everyone on your team and listeners are welcome to. It's a global, very affordable week-long festival to understand better how we all can learn more about Tibet, connect to the change makers inside, to stay connected, and to care about beyond sort of our own local areas, wherever that may be. How do you do that from year to year to year, despite all the challenges? So Machik Fest to me is like a big old family reunion. We celebrate the arts, science so much. Education, of course, is the centerpiece. But so we put all those kind of events together as well.
All right, so I popped the link to the website up on the screen, because I think that's probably the best place to go to learn more about the programs. I'm sure the festival will be advertised there as well. We'll share your handles as well on social media shortly, because I think that's obviously another great spot to connect with you and learn more about upcoming projects. So we have a question here coming in. I'm going to squeeze in from YouTube.
Sure.
From our audience. And so they're wondering about training that teachers might get. Is there further training for teachers, for educators? They're just hoping you can expand on that a little bit.
Good question. So Tibet is physically huge, and it's the size of Western Europe. So there's different things going on in different parts of Tibet. That's the easiest short answer. And in some areas, there needs to be a lot more done. And in other areas, there's quite a bit being done, which is kind of not dissimilar to many other places in the world, including where I am. There's always inequities in education, but the bigger challenge that Tibetan teachers face, if that's the question at hand, is access to teaching through our mother tongue. And I do believe most teachers would like that capacity, and initially even becoming a bilingual teacher itself in most cultures is not easy. In Tibet, it's certainly not easy. And yet some people have managed to create that pathway for hundreds of teachers. And it's precious. It's something that we need to ensure continues on into Tibet's future.
All right. Well, I must say it's always great to connect with a fellow Canadian. I know all about the weather right now. We got about, I would say, a spread out 15 to 20 centimeters. I found myself doing the driveway 4 times
Yes.
the day, which was delightful. But I guess it just comes with living somewhere in the great north.
Oh, great to be here. Thank you, Joe.
Of course. I'm going to share those social handles there. You're doing incredible work. It's so inspiring. The story is inspiring. And what I love the most is it's not even slowing down. It's just building momentum. It's growing. And that's probably most exciting of all.
Well, thank you so much. And best of luck with everything you're doing. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, listening. Have a great rest of the weekend. And I hope it's not too long before we connect again.
Yep. Stay engaged.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.
All right. Well, what a great morning. Things are rolling along. It's so great to see more festival registrants starting to tune in. Don't forget that chat is there for you, that live chat. We would love to see the questions that you have for our speakers. So use that chat, send in your questions, and let's jump right into our next event. So our next event I'm really excited for. This event has been pre-recorded because our speaker, Leila in Tanzania, she's in a remote region this weekend, and her connectivity, she couldn't guarantee that we'd have a good enough connection to connect live from the field. So her and I got together Wednesday morning, first thing, and we pulled together a great session, which I'm going to play for you now. But of course, I want to give Leila a great introduction before I do that. So Leila Lichtenfeld co-founded African People and Wildlife in 2005 to empower rural communities to conserve and benefit from their surrounding wildlife and natural resources. So a 20-year resident of Tanzania, Leila specializes in holistic landscape level approaches to conservation and community development. As one of the few female CEOs in East African conservation, she's also passionate about elevating rural women as environmental leaders and drivers of social change in their communities. So I am going to let Leila take over. There's a few questions mixed in there as well. So here we go.
It's wonderful to be here today celebrating inspiring women in science. I'm excited to tell people today about African people and wildlife and our work to find the balance for communities and nature. And I thought to kick it off, I'd like to take you over to Africa, to Tanzania, to meet some of the team members that are doing the incredible work on the ground here in Tanzania with communities, wildlife, and nature. So Joe, if you'd play that first video, please. Thank you. Africa represents our planet in some of the most phenomenal ways, with its incredible diversity of people, wildlife, and landscapes. I sense here that I'm part of something bigger than myself. In Tanzania, I'm constantly inspired and humbled by the connections between all things wild and human, but I'm also acutely aware of the delicate bonds between them. If we break them, we lose something that can never be replaced. We have a responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen.
Kabla ya African People and Wildlife, kulikuwa na migogoro baina ya watu na wanyama wakali hasa simba. Watu waliwaua simba kwa wingi na kuwatowesha moja kwa moja.
At African People and Wildlife, we are finding the balance for communities and nature. We are working to ensure that vital ecosystems and species endure for generations to come. A key part of that is the participation of local people, our key partners on the ground.
African People and Wildlife is a unique organization because we transcend the boundaries of conservation and community development. Where we work, the majority of the land is shared between people and wildlife. So we partner with local communities to ensure that every single one of our projects equally benefits people and wildlife, creating those powerful win-win scenarios.
Elimu, vuta hai, zaidi matukio
umewaletea wanyama kama simba, duma, mbwa mwitu kuongezeka katika vijiji vyetu na hata tarangire.
In northern Tanzania, we've reduced livestock attacks by up to 90% at the boma, or cattle corral. And lions are now coming back.
Our team members are global leaders in community-driven conservation. Because we base 100% of our operations in the field, we become part of the community, a real resource and partner. Because we live among the people and emphasize hiring locally, our team members have a specialized knowledge of community wildlife dynamics. This is a key part of our success.
African people and wildlife, together with local communities, we are restoring the vital habitats that are crucial for both people and the wildlife. Through our Sustainable Rangeland Initiative, community members are using innovative technology, data collection, and information sharing to conserve their grazing lands.
Asasi ya watu na wanyamapori inaunganisha ulinzi thabiti wa mazingira na kuboresha maisha ya wanajamii ili kutafuta uwiano baina ya uhifadhi na maisha baadaye ya watu.
Sababu tulipata elimu ya ujasiriamali, tukaanzisha mradi wa mizinga, tukapata elimu ya sisi wenyewe kupandisha mizinga na kupakua sisi wenyewe na kuhifadhi mali na kutafutia soko.
Now people have more options for their livelihoods.
Kwa ujumla tunaamini tukiwekeza katika elimu, kujenga uwezo na uhifadhi ni nguzo muhimu kwa vijana wa sasa na wa kesho.
Is very crucial to ensuring the future of people and wildlife in these landscapes. We need you to get involved in this program so that we can expand into other areas of northern Tanzania.
This is a model with global significance. African people and wildlife's vision is to quadruple our reach over the next decade, positively impacting tens of thousands more wildlife and the people they live among. To do this, we'll share our unique model of community-driven conservation with more and more partners across Africa, while continuing to expand our effective on-the-ground conservation efforts in Tanzania. If we can make sure that local communities are well positioned to protect Africa's wildest landscapes for both people and wildlife, then we will have done our job well. It's a legacy we all can be proud of.
I hope you enjoyed that video of our team members and the community members that we work with to find the balance for communities and nature. A lot of people often wonder how I got involved in this work, and it's been a lifelong legacy of love for lions. But that really, as I got to know people on the African continent more, it broadened out into a passion for the people, the culture, the wildlife, the landscapes of this incredible continent. And so I've been blessed to be able to pursue my passion, which really started as a young girl with a dream. And I've just worked and worked towards that dream of getting to actually see a real wild lion, which I did when I was just a freshman in college and was able to go to Kenya and spend some time there with the National Outdoor Leadership School and to learn about the country and the people and the wildlife. And then I returned later on to do research in southern Kenya as a Fulbright scholar and really began to look at local people's relationship to the natural world and to conservation. And I found this intriguing. I pursued my PhD in social ecology and wildlife ecology at Yale University. And I met my husband in Tanzania, where I was then moving on to do my research. And when we finished that work some time ago, we decided to put the research into action. And we co-founded African People and Wildlife and began to develop the Noloholo Environmental Center. So you're seeing a picture there of the center, which is in northern Tanzania on the southeastern edge of Tarangire National Park. So that small inset at the bottom is the actual, that line you see in the middle of the photo is the boundary between Tarangire on the left-hand side of the photo, or the western side, and community lands on the eastern side, where our Noloholo Environmental Center resides. And one of the first major innovations coming out of Noloholo and our partnership with local communities was the living wall, which you see there, the circular enclosure of cattle. It's a fortified livestock corral that uses living, growing trees as fence posts, often Conifer africana that you see growing there. And those fence posts help to hold up some chain link fencing, which keeps lions, leopards, hyenas, and other carnivores out, and it keeps people's livestock safe at night. And of course, in the background there, you see beautiful Mount Kilimanjaro. So this photo was taken in the West Kilimanjaro landscape. And with living walls, we've been able to dramatically decrease conflict between people and lions, and we've been able to keep people's livestock safe in partnership with them. They invest in the living wall, and both the purchase of the chain link and the installation of the fence. And as a result, lion populations have been able to rebound. And so this little girl, cute little girl, is named Indito. She belongs to a pride that resides around the Noloholo Environmental Center and in the community of Loberceret. And because we're able to reduce conflict and because there is such incredible tolerance still among local people for living with lions, Indito and her family is going strong. And here she is with her mother. She's about 2 years old now and continues to roam, spending more than 50% of her time outside of Tarangire National Park in the community land. So again, it's just absolutely critical that we work with our local partners to find conservation solutions. And that's why the innovative living walls were so successful, because the original idea came from the community themselves. And really at the heart of our work at African People and Wildlife is this idea of holistic conservation, bringing all the pieces together on a landscape. And so we work in a number of different areas, whether that's strengthening natural resource stewardship, whether it's developing conservation enterprise or conserving wildlife, restoring and connecting landscapes, or building strategic partnerships. We're always looking for those win-win opportunities where both people and wildlife thrive. And all of these initiatives, we layer our impact in the geographies where we work. So where we're able to prevent conflict successfully, we want to layer on top of that really good grassland management. And on top of that, we want to layer strong benefits for local community members to continue to protect these important resources. And throughout it all, we're always asking, why do local communities want to protect their natural environments? And we want to work with them to develop sustainable long-term solutions that come from them themselves and meet their own goals for environmental conservation. So another great example is our Women's Beekeeping Initiative. We're working with over 100 women's groups in northern Tanzania to help them work in the beekeeping enterprise and to be able to harvest honey. The honey is harvested out in the bush, so anywhere the women hang their hives, those trees are protected from cutting, and it's not allowed to cultivate within a certain perimeter of the tree. And so it protects wild spaces where wildlife and livestock are also roaming. Of course, we like to ensure that the women also have state-of-the-art technology. And so we have, working in partnership with Esri, we have dashboards that help the women to track their progress. And what you see here is, for instance, a dashboard showing how many hives were hung in a particular year, how many total hives overall were harvested in that year, and again, an accounting of how many crude tons of honey have been harvested. Over 16.5 tons of honey have been harvested to date with this project, and we're about to launch a very exciting women's enterprise center that has a fully equipped state-of-the-art honey processing center so that the women can really start bringing their honey to market in a bigger way. Similarly, we work with community members to protect the rangelands, the pastures where both wildlife and livestock depend on for both critical grazing resources, and of course the predators follow the wild prey into these pastures, so it's important habitat for both. Again, we developed this system in partnership with local community members, understanding what's important to them in terms of measuring and monitoring the quality of their grasslands, which are so critical to pastoralists, people of cattle, people of livestock, whose livelihood is absolutely dependent on healthy grasses, healthy water sources, a healthy natural environment. And again, we do this by developing dashboards in partnership with community members, looking at what information is important to them to collect about the quality of the grasslands. And I apologize, this is in Swahili, because of course that's more relevant to our partners, but they're looking at things like how many invasive species up there in D do we see on the landscape, and which ones in particular? In E, what's the length of the grass over time? And you can see it dips down lower in September and October as the dry season becomes more heavily upon us. And then the height of the grass starts to be replenished in November and December as the rain comes. And then in F, their own assessment of the quality of the rangelands. And really important in G is just a photo of the area, which then by using dashboards and having tablets, community members can share with decision makers in their environments which pastures should be grazed, which should be closed off, which should be waited to be used for drought scenarios. So it's a really, really powerful system that we're also working now to share at higher levels at the district, regional, and governmental levels so that everyone has access to this data. And really, when we look going forward, so what does this all mean for African people and wildlife? We're in an incredibly exciting period of transition where we're working to establish now Noloholo as a center of excellence for holistic conservation so that the innovations, ideas, partnerships coming out of Noloholo can really begin to influence conservation policy on a national level in a systemic way, and also even internationally. And so some of the work, innovative work that our team has done in Tanzania is now translating into strong conservation work in Angola, in the southeastern highlands, a critical Lasima water tower, which provides critical water resources to the very world famous Okavango Delta downstream and the people, the wildlife, and the environments that depend on that. This is an exciting partnership with the National Geographic Okavango Wilderness Project that we're really excited to be lending our community engagement expertise to this very important project in this very, very important landscape. Other things that are happening right now at African People and Wildlife, we just recently launched an African Women in Conservation initiative so that we can really help Tanzanian women to climb the ladder, the conservation ladder here in Tanzania. With this effort, we'll be working with the Tanzanian government to understand what some of the barriers and opportunities to engaging and getting a leadership position eventually in Tanzania are. We'll be offering internships, conservation internships for women every year so that they can get their foothold in the conservation sector and then help them to work with partners to continue to pursue their career. And one incredible leader, this is Yamat Langai, who's a local Maasai woman in our monitoring and evaluation team. She's also the heroine of a recent film called Tarangire, Our Heritage, Our Future. So I encourage you to look at that film and get a real glimpse of the Tarangire National Park and the work that Yamat and others are doing to protect this incredible landscape. But we want to help support more women like Yamat, who are incredible leaders in their communities, to engage more in conservation over the long term. We're also just now launching a very exciting project to help protect the big jumbos, the elephants of the Ngorongoro Conservation Area Authority. This project is a partnership with the Elephant Crisis Fund and Global Conservation, along with the Ngorongoro Conservation Area Authority, to help bring the authority together with local community members to improve their human-wildlife conflict management and mitigation, so we can get more information quickly so that when elephants are in the crops or other species are causing issues, there's a communication between the community and the authority, and we can resolve these conflicts in a way that works for everybody in the landscape. So a very, very important partnership emerging in that landscape. And of course, we continue to build our youth conservation programming. The youth are the future of conservation. We want to get them interested and excited early on. Again, working with many local community members, they already have a very strong connection to the environment. We want to simply continue to build on that relationship and excitement. And we're very thrilled this year to hopefully be able to resume our trips to Tarangire National Park, where we give children the opportunity to go into the park and witness the wildlife that's contributing to the future of their country, both from an economic and a natural resource point of view, get them excited about it. And of course, we had to put some of these trips on hold due to COVID, but we're really hoping to be able to resume this again and to begin to inspire again the next generation and to continue to provide scholarships for up and coming youth. We have a number of kids that have now graduated from our high school scholarship program and have pursued college and university degrees and other diplomas. So it's really exciting that this future network are now actually emerging as some of today's leaders. So there's a lot going on at African People and Wildlife, and I encourage you to look us up on social media or keep tabs of our website. There's always something new and exciting happening at African People and Wildlife, and we love for people to get involved and ask questions and continue to follow our work. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you all today. Back to you, Joe.
All right, Leila, thank you so much for an awesome presentation. And, you know, every time we talk, I've been lucky enough to host you for a lot of live events with classrooms all over the world. Every time we speak, you've got new projects on the go. It's so impressive. So huge congratulations to you and the whole team.
Thank you very much. The team is just continuing to grow, doing an incredible job. And I can't speak enough about the team members. Those are the heroes of conservation. I'm just here to represent them today.
All right. Well, I've got a few questions for you before we let you go today. And, you know, watching the presentation, I thought of a few things. So the first one, I loved seeing all the team members using the technology, whether it's smartphones, GIS, camera traps, and things like that. So I wonder, initially, when you were bringing in that new technology, was there any resistance to the technology? And then what kind of opportunities has that technology, the knowledge of that technology, brought to the community?
I think because we had worked with community members for such a long time in different ways to collect data, starting with very traditional paper data collection protocols, then moving slowly onto online systems, and then to the much more sophisticated platform. Because we did it gradually, we didn't see resistance. We saw people building skills, people that we had been working with for many years, wanting to continue to build those skills. And so people are really excited about using this technology. And what it's done for us and for our partners across northern Tanzania is just tremendous, because it's put information in real time back into the hands of the people that are collecting it, the owners actually of that data. So they're able to use their data in real time. The analyses are updating every time more information comes in. People have access to maps. They can look at, for instance, where is conflict occurring with lions in their community. They can get a sense of where the problems are and how to resolve those problems. And then at a bigger level, we're now able to share this data, and there's a tremendous amount of data coming in. So we have 4 team members on our monitoring and evaluation team. It's not even enough at this point to keep up with all the data coming in and ensuring that it's cleaned and properly. If we didn't have this technological solution, we would not be able to share this data, you know, in a reasonable time frame. But what we're able to do now is share it with other conservation partners, with government authorities, of course, with the communities that we work with. And so it becomes more meaningful because it becomes accessible to a larger group of people and can be used in many, many different ways. So it makes it much, much more powerful from my point of view.
Okay. And now to kind of look at it from the other perspective, traditional knowledge of the land, you know, that the community has is invaluable. So I wonder, what kind of impact did it have on your views and the work you were doing initially? How did bringing that traditional knowledge in kind of change maybe your initial thoughts when you started?
The traditional knowledge is absolutely the key. When I first started doing research in northern Tanzania for my PhD, spending time learning from people was absolutely critical. Learning their perspectives, their ideas, how they talk about conservation, the dialogue. And I think that's what's led to so much of our success at African People and Wildlife, is that we turn the question around and really look at it from the community point of view. And so even when you're, you know, to connect this to the dashboards, the data that you see coming in there, when we develop those systems, we develop them in partnership with community members. What information do they want to record on the landscape? There's many different things, obviously, from a rangeland point of view, from a scientific, technical point of view, you could be collecting. But we wanted to make sure that the primary information that people were spending their time on was relevant to the local people. And so basically what we took is the traditional system of measuring the height of grass, the amount of bare ground that has been done for centuries on the landscape, and just put it into a technical solution that just sped up some of the access to the information. But I think at the heart of our model at African People and Wildlife is really recognizing how much knowledge there is on the ground with the people, and that if you can open up that information reservoir, you can get to solutions that are sustainable over the long term because they come from the local people and they make sense to them.
Yeah. Well, I can see why you've been so successful with your work. I was watching one of your conservation videos on YouTube this morning, and you said, you know, effective conservation, you really have to commit to an area. And that's something that you've definitely done. Establish that trust, have a great team. And it looks like the next generation is right on board as well, and excited to play their role.
Yeah, the commitment to this area we will always have at African People and Wildlife. I think we all struggle with how does one go to scale. And so what we found is that by having these deep relationships and, you know, continuing to address conservation challenges in these landscapes, the way we go to scale is by helping others understand the process by which we do our work, by bringing people into the landscape through peer-to-peer learning opportunities at Noloholo, to then take the best practices from this work and implement it in the landscapes where they are, because we know every one of these landscapes has its unique issues. They have unique ecological setting, unique culture, and unique politics, economics. But there are best practices in how we can engage that can go to scale across the continent. That's, again, one of our sort of big efforts with our capital campaign for Noloholo at the moment.
All right. So I want to ask a little bit about the beekeeping. So obviously a great initiative, great income for the community. It has that added benefit of, you know, areas where the hives are, it's protecting those areas as well. I know in some parks, they use beekeeping as well to kind of keep elephants from going in certain areas. Is that being utilized as well in your area?
So where we are, we haven't had as many issues in the crops. So in the Tarangire-Manyara ecosystem, we haven't implemented that technique yet, but that technique is being used in Ngorongoro. And we hope to be working with partners as we begin to launch this new project to potentially bring that beehive fencing effort to the Ngorongoro conservation area. So I think, again, it's a matter of ensuring that the solutions that you're implementing are relevant in the areas, but it's an incredible project and absolutely one that we hope to look to implementing in Ngorongoro with partners.
All right. And maybe just to touch on, as we're kind of wrapping up for today, the BOMAs, the living walls, are such a great project. I wonder how many do you think have been implemented since the first one? And then are they pretty self-sufficient, or do they need to be renewed over time?
So today we have over 1,500 active living walls on the landscape. So when you see our numbers, those are the numbers of the ones that are active and working in the landscape. We may have installed a few more, but people move or, you know, things change. They do not require too much upkeep. Every 2 to 3 years, our M&E team will go out and try to visit every single one of the living walls. And if there are some issues that need to be addressed, then we'll recommend the community members make a few adjustments. If there are any major issues, for instance, the gates perhaps have become, you know, worn over time or have issues, then we will often help to work on those and to replenish them. But I think it's really important that we don't just put a living wall out there and then forget about it over time. We are revisiting them and ensuring that they're productive and active. And I think that's why we've had such success in recovering or initiating the recovery of the Tarangire lion project, just Tarangire lion population, because there are so many living walls in this landscape now.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the effectiveness is obviously really impressive. And, you know, I think you probably agree the community has always lived with lions. They don't want them gone, but when those conflicts happen, then, you know, it's tough. So having these solutions like the living walls, it really benefits both sides, the lions and the community, and it looks like both are thriving.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the first questions we asked in the early years, I'm not going to say how long ago that was do people still want to see lions on the landscape? And they absolutely did. They wanted their children to hear the roar of the lion, but they also don't want their prize cattle, you know, being taken on a daily basis. I mean, that's basically like to a pastoralist, having a lion come and kill your cattle is like having someone break into your home or break into your bank account. It's personal. And so being able to work together to reduce those conflicts, what we've seen is just, and again, I think it's an example for the world, the incredible tolerance that people in these landscapes have for large, dangerous wildlife in their backyard is just tremendous. It's heartwarming. And it's an example that the world should really be looking at for conservation and for how we, you know, respect the natural world around us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Leila, it's always a pleasure to connect. I always think back to one event we did where we sent you with a satellite unit and we connected out in the grassland. You had some of your team piled into the back of a truck. And I remember just how excited everybody was to be sharing the work that they were doing and how passionate they were. So again, thank you for the work you're doing. A huge shout out to your team. It is great work. I want to share the link here as well one more time. I encourage everybody to go visit, learn more. Of course, support the project in any way that you can. And Leila, it's always a pleasure to connect and hear about the new projects and see there's always more coming down the pipeline.
Thanks so much, Joe. And thanks for always training a lens on all these incredible projects around the world with your effort. It's tremendous to be able to get this information out to other people and to be able to share and, you know, stimulate ideas and science and thought and women's leadership. So that's really, really critical. And I appreciate that opportunity. And let's get another session going in the field again soon.
All right. Absolutely. All right. For now, we'll say goodbye, but I don't think it'll be too long before we connect again. Thanks so much, Leila.
Thank you.
All right. So a great session with Leila. Incredible work that she's doing in Tanzania with her whole team. We did share the website there briefly. I'm going to pop it up on the screen one more time. Please do check it out. Please do support the work any way that you can. And then if you want to follow Leila on Twitter or Instagram, I can share her contacts right there. You can follow along with her adventures. All right. Well, from the grasslands, we are going to head back to the ocean. So a conservation biologist and National Geographic explorer, Dr. Andrea Marshall leads groundbreaking research and conservation programs globally to save endangered sharks, rays, and other threatened marine megafauna in some of their most critical habitats. So she was the first person to complete a doctoral dissertation on manta rays. She developed the first online database for them as well. And in her career has discovered 2 new species of these giant rays. She's the co-founder of the Marine Megafauna Foundation, an NGO dedicated to saving our ocean giants from extinction. So let's bring her in live with us right now. Hi, Andre. How are we doing?
Hi, Joe. It's always so nice to see you.
It's always great to see you. And more clear than usual. Usually our connections are in Mozambique or in the field. But today we're going to have a nice, I probably shouldn't say this because it's going to jinx us. We're going to have a nice clean connection today.
Yeah, you caught me in Florida. I'm actually on my way back to Africa tomorrow, but I'm happy to be able to hopefully have a stable connection with you today.
All right, awesome. Well, I love every single part of the work you do. I can't wait for you to share it today. I'm going to disappear backstage and let you take over for a bit.
All right, great. Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be able to be participating in an event like this, which is really kind of focusing on women trailblazers. That's something that's particularly close to my heart. And I kind of created a little bit of a different show today because I was really inspired by a lot of the other talks that we've been hearing this weekend. So I'm just going to share my screen really quick. And give that presentation to you. You seeing that okay, Joe?
There we go. Yeah, it looks good. Do you want to try and hit play, see if it'll go nice and full screen for us?
I'm going to do that.
Perfect.
There we go. All right. So as Joe mentioned, I do help run an organization called the Marine Megafauna Foundation, which is an organization that I co-founded many years ago now. Sometimes the name can be a bit of a mouthful for people, but basically we focus on endangered, usually quite endangered or at least threatened marine megafauna species. So large animals, usually very iconic or charismatic, but mostly we focus on them because they're oftentimes the first animals to be removed from ecosystems, and they're very, very difficult to bring back. So those are kind of the flagship species that we work on, in order to try and get the primary research done that is going to inform on the management of remaining populations around the globe. We've been going for quite a while, about 20 years now, with that mission of saving our ocean giants from extinction. And we do work all over the world. So this organization has projects all over the world on many different species, but we do focus in some very specific core areas and have really long running programs in some of those areas. We started as primarily researchers, and I'm so privileged to be able to lead research teams all over the world that do work on different types of threatened species. I'm very proud of the science that the organization puts out, and as one of the principal scientists, it's like I said, a real honor for me to lead a lot of these teams in the development of ideas and try and figure out what our objectives are and how to protect some of these animals in their most critical habitats. But over the years, we've grown from just doing primary research to really trying to get more actively involved in conservation and trying to get that data being used to underpin local management, but also international conservation. And I'll talk a little bit later about the work that we're doing now to protect actual ecosystems, which I'm really excited about. But one of the things that was really exciting for me about this weekend was, this is, I think the reason that Joe put this this weekend together was to really highlight some of the women who are blazing trails. But I found it really, really interesting that a lot of the women are sharing how we got to where we are, because I think that can be incredibly helpful as people watch on and think about, a lot of the questions coming in are, how do I start, or how do I navigate to get to where you guys are now? And sometimes, people in my position and a lot of these other really, really incredible women, we focus on the achievements and rather than kind of how we got to where we are. So I kind of just wanted to take the time to talk about my story because I think it's relevant. And, a lot of the women this weekend, we share a similar story. I was a tree hugger, literally from the beginning. And I was always just enchanted with the marine environment. I was always obsessed with marine life, particularly sharks. This didn't really come from my parents. My mom can barely swim. It wasn't that my parents were actively involved in conservation or were, divers or anything like that. It's just something that I connected with from a really, really young age. I loved Tanya's story earlier this weekend that she fell in love with the ocean, even living in a landlocked environment in Europe. Sometimes something just sparks you, sets you off, and you kind of find your passion. I have a young daughter myself. She's just turned 6. And my mom used to tell me at age 5, I used to tell people when they asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I would tell them I wanted to be a shark biologist. And she would shake her head because she had no idea where that came from. But it's something that never changed. It's something that never altered my entire life. I always just wanted to study the ocean and study sharks. So it was not surprising that, in order for me to figure out how to do that, the first step was to get myself underwater. So I worked very hard to expose myself to dive training, went through kind of initial dive training when I was 10 and 11. And I was literally writing the test to be a junior open water diver on my 12th birthday, which was the youngest age that you could get certified at the time. A few years later, I started up with underwater photography, and then I kind of moved straight into my dream of going out and sort of photographing sharks and kind of being with them in their environment. And it was just such an exciting time for me. I really felt like I was starting to achieve my dream. But then I kind of hit a wall, because even though I was a diver, I was a girl and I was in this male-dominated environment. And everywhere I went, most of the divers were males. And every time I knocked on doors to try and introduce myself to scientists, especially shark biologists, they were men. And I mean, I was a kid and they did treat me like a kid, but I was also a girl. And I think a lot of people didn't take me seriously because of that. And even in school, I remember a lot of teachers trying to steer me away from sciences, from STEM fields, because they felt like there wasn't a strong future for girls in those fields. And I was very bright. I was the top of my class, but they kind of always gently nudged me over to like literature and other things like that. And so I was feeling a little bit confused and lost, and I didn't have very many role models at the time. And then in walked this woman who I was so fortunate to actually live almost down the street from. She lived very close to where I lived in Northern California. And my mom happened to read about her a few times in the news and saw that she was speaking in the Bay Area where I lived in California. And so I went to go see her, I think for the first time, speak when I was maybe 14 years old. And she changed everything for me. For the first time, I actually saw someone who had achieved, actually, not just achieving, she already had achieved so many of the things that I had wanted to achieve myself, but wasn't sure if I was going to be able to do it. And she was a woman, and she had just broken down all these barriers, being like the first chief scientist for NOAA, going not just where no man had gone before, but in many ways where no human had gone before in the deep sea. And she was just pioneering all of these amazing things like technology in terms of the submersibles that she was helping to design and use. So she was just such an exciting and inspiring person for me. I just was like, finally, there was someone that I could look to and say, well, this is the kind of career that I want to have. And clearly you can achieve it, even if you're a girl. So that was like a really important breakthrough moment for me, where I said, I'm going to be able to do this. I'm going to become a scientist. And in those critical years between maybe 14 and in my early 20s, when I was still doing an undergrad at university, I really decided to focus. I thought the easiest way for me to get to where I needed to go was to build these skill sets that I knew were going to be valuable for me later. And so I got more serious with my underwater photography. I got mentored by a really great underwater photographer and later cinematographer, Tom Campbell, where I was living in Santa Barbara. Tom was pioneering things like high definition filmmaking underwater. It's one of the first to be doing that. And so I took notes. I followed his team around the world. He was also a technical diver. And so the people on his team were all doing technical diving. So I got nitrox certified, learned how to use mixed gas. I started to get experience using rebreather technology. And I really felt like those were critical years for me because I felt like by the time I got to the stage where I was doing field work of my own later in my 20s and 30s, I was so comfortable underwater, and I didn't have to get certified to do all these crazy types of tech diving then, because I knew how to use this gear already. I had my own gear already. So that was a really important time of my life. I also traveled extensively with him and his team, and just on my own. I would just travel around the world. And I felt like that was really important because the people that I would hear speak, from Sylvia Earle to Jeannie Clark or Jane Goodall, these people all seem to have this incredible context about just conservation and the world. And that comes from traveling and being well-traveled. So I spent a lot of years traveling as well, which I think wasn't easy. It's expensive to travel. It's hard to travel when you're young. It's kind of even scary to travel when you're young. But I really put a strong focus on that. I studied and I saved all my money and I traveled. And I knew what I wanted to be because through some of my work with these cinematography teams that were making different documentaries, I had been able to go to South Africa when I was very young, about 17 or 18. I had started doing diving with white sharks there. I just became absolutely fascinated and amazed by these animals. And I thought to myself, surely I was going to go and become a white shark researcher. So as soon as I was able, I moved to Africa. But what I found at the time is that there, by the time I got there and was ready to go, there were other people in that space. There were other people working on white sharks. There was quite a lot of really capable researchers and science happening there on them. And so it really made me reflect on what I wanted to contribute as a conservationist and as a biologist. I didn't want to just go in and replicate what other people were doing. I didn't feel like it was needed. But at the same time as well, I was also volunteering for the IUCN, for the shark specialist group that was just forming. And this group was a volunteer group. And my involvement in this group really helped to shape who I am today as a conservation biologist. Because at the time, I was really unsure of whether or not I should go into white shark research. And literally at the same time, I was helping to start this group whose goal was to assess all of the shark and ray species across the globe so that we would have a better idea of the status globally for sharks and rays. And as we started to evaluate them, we could see that they were really kind of standing out as one of the most threatened groups of animals in the world in terms of their conservation status. And they kept sliding reviews across the table to me, and I would just see that there were so many species that of sharks and rays, for instance, which I'm really interested in, that have not been properly studied, that were not being evaluated properly, and there was just such a lack of data available that I thought to myself, white sharks seem to be good. I think I need to find another species that I can really help in the same way that these other, great biologists are helping white sharks. And then a very important assessment came across the table to me, which was manta rays. And I was so excited at the time because who doesn't love manta rays? I've been a diver my whole life. Everybody loves manta rays. They're just one of the most iconic animals in the ocean. But I was absolutely horrified when I started to look into the fact that there had been really no formal research on them. We didn't know much about them. I tried very hard to put together all the information I could on these animals, but ultimately at the end of the assessment period, I had to list them as data deficient. And that really sat with me. Why do we not know anything about some of the most beloved animals, some of the biggest, some of the most iconic animals in our ocean? I left South Africa and started traveling around the rest of Africa, exploring, trying to figure out where my place could be. And I took the opportunity to run some exploratory trips with groups that were starting to move into Mozambique right after the Civil War. Everybody knew this coastline to be beautiful, very long coast, and incredibly biodiverse, but it had been shut down for years and years and years because of a raging civil war there. So being able to go back into the country for the first time and start to explore it and dive it with the new technology that was available now was a really incredible opportunity for me. So I took that chance, went into the country, traveled all around, but really was impressed with this Inyombane province, which sits at the kind of like a quarter up the country. It was just so beautiful. And I mean, so pristine. I hadn't seen anything like it in my entire life. I stumbled upon a manta ray population there, very large one. And so all of a sudden, the penny dropped and I realized maybe this was my moment. And I felt a little bit like Jane Goodall moving out to the middle of nowhere, building a tiny little leaf hut and just getting on with a study on these mantas for the first time. And it was probably one of the most extraordinary periods of my life. It just felt so authentic to be in this really wild place and studying these incredible animals for the first time. I'll always cherish the memories from that time. And I ultimately, as Joe mentioned, did a PhD on the mantas off that coastline. And because I was able to spend so much time in the water with them and get to know them, I was able to really focus on trying to collect those bits of data that were needed for the red list, so that the next time we evaluated this animal, that hopefully I would be able to list it actually, and rather than have it sit as data deficient. During my time there, I was lucky enough to describe the first species of manta that Joe was talking about. And that's because along the coast of Mozambique, the two different species of manta are sympatric, meaning that they live together. So I would go out to the reef and see images like this, where you would see a lot of smaller reef mantas swimming around, and giant mantas would be coming through. And it was so clear to me that they were two different species. And of course, I didn't get a lot of support as a really young girl in my 20s from all my male professors saying, like, you've got to be kidding me. Obviously, there are not two different species of mantas. But I persisted, and I was able to collect enough data to be able to demonstrate that they were after several years. And I think people were shocked because mantas live all over the world, and they were surprised that no one had actually noticed this or picked up on this previously. And off the back of that work, I was very privileged to be able to do a major BBC documentary, and in describing the new species, needed to travel around the world anyway, to be able to look at these animals' distributions around the world. And that led to me traveling extensively around the world, looking at different manta populations. And unfortunately, it opened my eyes to the reality of what was facing mantas in terms of their in terms of conservation. There was a global trade starting up in their body parts, where their gill plates were being removed and taken to Asia, mainly China, to be used in medicinal tonics that don't actually work, but still there's a market for. And I just started to see this alarming global trend, and it was so shocking. So for me, I instantly realized that I needed to step out of my comfort zone in Mozambique. I started programs in Indonesia, Ecuador, Myanmar, Florida. I mean, we started programs all over the world on mantas, and raced to try and figure out what was happening in these populations. But ultimately, I realized that that something else was needed, that we really needed to go after international level protection for these animals as fast as possible, because just working on them on the ground in several countries was not going to do it. So I became obsessed with the idea of getting these animals listed on the two major international conservation conventions, CMS, the Convention for Migratory Species Act, and CITES, the Convention for International Trade in Endangered Species. And these two treaties, for me, were a way to be able to put mantas on the map, to be able to show people how much threats they were facing, and how we really needed to take care if we didn't want to see populations being extirpated left, right, and center. And so we worked very hard for many years to get countries to champion these proposals and to get the information needed in the proposals. And ultimately, we were able successfully, with a group of other international researchers and conservationists, to get manta rays listed on the appendices of both of these international treaties. And it was an incredibly important moment, historic moment, but at the same time, at the end, I wasn't really sure where to go. That was my goal at the time. And this is one of the things that I wanted to talk about in this talk, is just the fact that you can have a plan for yourself, but ultimately, as you go on in a career, I think the most important thing is to listen to what's happening around you, to kind of really see and contextualize what's happening around you, and be able to always think ahead for, what's next? How can you build on the work that you're doing? Not necessarily scale up, as we've heard. Sometimes it's better to really focus. And so for me, I had to think, conservation for me is a bit like triage. I think it's really important to recognize some of the areas that may be too far gone, and also recognize what places you probably still can save, but you need to focus. And for me, Mozambique was one of those places where I felt like things were spinning out of control. I mean, animals, endangered species, were being harvested all over the place. We could see massive population declines, just even for our mantas and whale sharks that we were focusing on at the time, just huge declines in their numbers. And it seemed like maybe it was too far gone, but I didn't believe it. And I loved the place so much that I told my team, we need to refocus from just all of the work we're doing globally, and we need to really focus on Mozambique if we're going to save this place. And I think it's worth saving. It's one of the most important areas for marine megafauna in Africa. And I thought to myself, well, just research alone on a couple of species isn't going to work. And so we started to toy with this idea of protecting ecosystems and protecting this seascape in Mozambique. And if as a small NGO, we were going to be able to influence the protection of this area at all. And I decided that whatever it took, I wanted to be able to impact this area because it was my home and I had spent most of my career there, but it was also an area that I felt so passionate about. It's so beautiful, it's so biodiverse, it's so important for marine megafauna, particularly sharks and rays. So I began to study and help with other conservation efforts there. Taking an ecosystem approach to it, working on a lot of the other species, many of them sharks, because we are, shark and ray biologists. And so we started to look at a lot of the other species that live there, really started to focus on some of the other very critically endangered species like the wedgefish, things like leopard sharks, and even start researching incredibly rare species like the small-eyed stingray that have never, been worked on before either. This approach helped us understand what was happening across the seascape, what the threats were to all of these animals, what the problem areas were, what the areas were that we felt like we could affect change. And we also expanded a lot of our programs to be so much more than research. We started looking at sustainable livelihoods and how we can change the way that people fish, and whether there were better ways for them to do that or alternate livelihoods for them to have, integrating community conservation and looking at tourism and how that was going to start impacting the ecosystem there. And most importantly, we really went big and started to invest in education and awareness and capacity building. We started swimming programs, we started training biologists, we started training marine rangers in the country, and we just got really invested in the conservation of this coastline. And this woman then appeared in my life again as she made her famous TED Talk about the hope spots, and she created Mission Blue. She gave me hope and that inspiration that we could create these hope spots around the globe, that that people like herself could help champion causes like ours in even these really remote environments, and that together as like a coalition of different conservationists across the globe, that we might be able to affect change by looking at what areas are the most important areas to protect, and then trying to make sure that change happens in those areas, and conservation is put on the radar in those areas. And so I had a lot of conversations with government in Mozambique, who, and ANAC, who's the Department of Conservation there. And we looked at the existing conservation areas and how we as MMF could partner with these areas over time to help expand on some of these areas and to manage them better. So we are working very hard with the two existing protected areas, and we're creating a new protected area with partners to the south of the existing protected areas that's going to increase the footprint by about 50%. And that's really exciting because it means that we're creating a seascape along this coastline. But the animals that we work with are highly migratory, and they only, pass through any of these areas. They live along this entire coastline and even far out to sea. We know this. We know these are highly migratory animals, and you can't fence a park in the ocean. So you have to think big. And so I'm really excited about the next 10 years and the next maybe even 20, 30 years in Mozambique. I have a huge vision now, and Mission Blue and I just created a hope spot just a couple of weeks ago. That's a grand scale. It's a huge hope spot idea, but we're really excited about growing the current protected areas to something the size that these animals need. It's really ambitious, especially for Africa, but I intend to spend the rest of my life kind of focusing on this area and figuring out how to get the animals that I'm interested in protecting the area that they need in order to be safeguarded. So thanks very much. I'm privileged to be able to share my story with you today. I hope that helped, give you an idea of what we do here at MMF. And yeah, if there's any time, I'll take one or two questions.
There's always time for questions, Andrea. Thank you so much for that amazing presentation. Thank you for taking us back in time and walking us through your story, from inspirations to maybe people asking you why instead of why not. That's something we've really focused on this weekend. That's one of the first things Sylvia said when she kicked off the festival on Friday night, is we should be asking why not why. And your plans for the next 10, 20, 30 years are absolutely incredible. They're ambitious, they're bold, and why not? Why not have those big, bold, ambitious goals? Because that's how things get done. Yeah, very cool. So I think the first question I want to ask you is, we're going to share this playlist of events with our community of educators across North America and beyond. So out to 10,000 or so educators. And as educators, it's our job to inspire that next generation, to get them excited, and to get them asking those questions like why not. So you ran into maybe a few educators who tried to steer you in directions away from your passion. What advice would you give to educators when they see that spark of passion in their classroom?
I think it would be to take kids seriously. I think kids have a really great sense of who they are from a really young age. I mean, I think now as a parent, I can really appreciate that kids come into knowing who they are from a really, really young age. And I think that while it's important also to be able to put forward like realistic expectations for people, because I think that's, always important. I think that, when you can see a true passion in a kid, I think that you should really push that as much as you can. I feel very fortunate in my career to be doing exactly what I want to be doing. And I want that for everyone. I think that you perform best in your life if you're doing exactly what you feel like you're supposed to be doing. So I think every educator should try and figure out how to get kids to dig deep within themselves and find out where their real passion is, not what society, thinks that they should be, but what really moves them. Because once you're motivated by that passion, I mean, the sky's the limit.
Oh, no question. I mean, our whole philosophy is that, well, I mean, I've been lucky enough to work with hundreds and hundreds of scientists and explorers and adventurers and conservationists and hear their stories, and they share something really common. Everybody remembers when it happened. It might have been meeting someone, a book, a documentary, an inspiring educator, something. Sometimes it's big, sometimes it's small, just triggered that passion and led them kind of on a career path, a career trajectory. So yeah, big and small, these inspirational things can happen. And that's why I love kind of where you ended off talking a little bit about marine megafauna and some of the education programs you're doing in the community, getting kids out and learning to swim, which might be a surprise to people. You live on the coastline and you might think, well, of course they know how to swim. Can you talk a little bit about that program and why it might be that, kids haven't learned to swim yet?
Well, for me, it was that context again. As I spoke before, I think the greatest thing I ever gave myself was context, being able to have traveled around the world and to visit different areas and see how things are different in different places. And I could never figure out when I got to Africa at first, why there was such a disconnect between, people and the ocean. And then it dawned on me that the ocean in Africa is quite hostile. Big waves, huge crashing surf. It's not like the idyllic places in the South Pacific or in Indonesia or Thailand where kids grow up learning how to swim, jumping off piers. And there's a lot of loss of life. A lot of kids drown, a lot of fishermen drown. People are terrified of the ocean. There's big, scary animals out there in their mind. They haven't been educated properly about these animals. And so there's this huge disconnect. So for us, conservation started with trying to change that, empowering kids by making them feel safe in the ocean for the first time, making their parents feel safe about taking them to the ocean because now they knew how to swim, and connecting them with these leviathans that live offshore. I mean, all they see is giant whales breaching and huge sharks and mantas flying out of the water and dolphins. I mean, it can be scary for a kid until you make them excited and passionate about these animals and show them that most of these animals can't even hurt them. So, it was really about connecting them with the ocean. And as those kids have grown now over the last 20 years, they are now becoming dive instructors. They are now becoming You know, the chiefs of fishing councils, they are now going into government, and that love for the ocean is going to, you know, touch all of the different, you know, aspects of their life and work, and hopefully will change the way that they behave and the way that they think about things. And so I think it's really, really important to invest in youth education. You just have to do it in a sustained way over time.
Absolutely. And I love that point. Representation is so important. So for this generation to see people like them in the ocean, studying, in government, researching, that's so important. And that really blazes a trail for them, something that they can follow when they see people in their community in those positions.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, Andrea, I want to share a few banners here because, first of all, we want to drive people to check out marinemegafauna.org. And, you know, you and I had a chat not too long ago about education and bringing it to not just Mozambique, but other places around the world, like Canada, the US. That education is so important. So there's the link if you want to check out some of Andrea's work. And then, of course, supporting that work is really important as well. And then if you want to follow along on some of her adventures, you can find her on Twitter and Instagram at Queen of Mantas. So Andrea, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to see you. Safe travels tomorrow as you head back to Africa. But what a treat to have you for a little bit of time with such a clear connection. Of course, it's always great to connect from the field, and we love doing that. But it's nice to be able to connect this way from time to time as well.
Thanks. It was great to be here. And congratulations on such a wonderful event. I've been tuning in all weekend.
All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And we'll talk soon. Okay, well, we're going to continue with our ocean theme right now. I can see our next speaker hanging out backstage. And actually, our next speaker sort of already got a little introduction from Erica Bergman this morning, who mentioned her as, you know, an amazing person who she was so thrilled to play a role in bringing her into this amazing world of submersibles and ocean exploration. So Kimberly Doe is joining us. She's a mechanical engineer and submersible pilot working with Global Sea Dive. She's been running around designing and prototyping robotics for over a decade. Her portfolio includes amazing robots from wearable exoskeletons, humanoid motorcycle riding robots, all the way to several inflatable fabric arms made for NASA. She helps run an underwater robot camp with Erica Bergman for girls 12 to 16. They're hoping to create and mentor a network of strong, empowered women who love to explore their curiosities as well as the ocean and the wild world that we do live in. So I'm going to bring Kimberly in with me right now. Hey, Kimberly, how are you?
Hello. Doing well. How are you? Good morning.
Good,
morning
good.
for
Well,
me.
it absolutely is. We're hitting about lunchtime here in the Eastern time zone, but thank you for starting your morning with us in the Women Blaze Trails Festival.
Yeah, it's so great to be here.
All right. Well, you and I connected a little bit earlier in the week because you move around a little bit with the work that you get to do. And we were able to have a little discussion from the submersible shop. We were able to show us some pretty cool things. So I've got the clip queued up here and ready to go. So if it sounds good, I say we dive into that a little bit and then talk a little bit more about some of the engineering you've done.
Yeah, that sounds great. Let's do it.
All right, here we go.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kimberly Doe, and I am a private submersible pilot. I started as a mechanical engineer with the specifics in robotics, and through a really lovely connection of Erica Bergman, who is a National Geographic submarine pilot, she invited me along board to try being a pilot. And so here I am, and I'm at the Triton submersibles manufacturing facility, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But here, Joe, do you want to pull up some pictures and show you what's up? Something that I think is really lovely about this job is that it takes you all around the world in the most beautiful locations ever. This was taken last year in the Bahamas while we were doing a filming shoot for Shark Week. And some of these pictures upcoming are are examples of that. Yeah, it's the most magical. This was right at dawn. The thing that I really, really love about submersibles is that we talk about looking at the surface of the water, like looking at the sky during the daytime, which is gorgeous and beautiful. But then once you go below the surface of the water, it's like you've uncovered a whole new world, and you don't even know what galaxies are around and available for you to see. So yeah, just like epic blue ocean shots. I can never get bored of the sky either, but so these are the two submarines that I dive. The red one is called Nomad, and the yellow one is called Nemo. And they both go down to 1,000 feet and take 2 people, a pilot and a passenger. We usually dive the subs together, which I think is pretty unique for our operation. But here they are at the surface of the ocean. And this is right when she's about to go down. You can kind of see her nose tipping forward. She's about to go diving. This picture over here, so while we were in the Bahamas, this is at around 750 feet. What the sub is looking at are these cute little like whip corals, and they're really, really, really fun and really rare. Something that I think I mentioned earlier about diving 2 subs, you can take pictures of both subs, and so the scale I think is like really impressive. When you're underwater, it's really kind of hard to tell how big things are. So seeing another sub is like pretty useful and awe-inspiring in that way. This is a thing. This is a thing we were looking at. I think this is around like 600 feet. We don't really know what it is. It kind of looks like a bunch of novels. I think it's really fun to go running around and being like, what kind of human remains have we left down here that have like fallen off of ships, sunken treasures, if you will. Yeah. So we are here at the Triton facility, which is kind of a treat. I'm here right now doing an annual. So that red sub that you saw just got a new paint job. So this is Nemo, and she looks really great. And she's actually quite small. In comparison, we have a couple of other subs. So Nemo only goes down to 1,000 feet. And these 2 subs behind me are much larger, you can see. And so the subs here, they take 3 people and they go down to 3,000 feet. And then we also have this smaller sub that is super cute. And this one goes down to 1,650 and it takes 3 people. It's pretty awesome because it's very, very small as opposed to these like kind of ginormous big subs. And then we have our support vehicle. And every time you ever have a submarine that goes underwater, you need to have a support vehicle to make sure there's someone on the surface to watch out for you. So yeah, here we are. These are the submarines. And then I'll give you a little bit of a tour of the submarine. So this is the back of the submarine, and this is our aft fang. So underneath here is kind of like the hood of a car. It's got all of our electronics. Both of our submarines are all battery powered, and this one has lithium batteries, which is pretty cool. These giant blue kind of tanks here are ballast tanks, and so they basically hold buoyancy, which help the sub submerge and then also rise back up to the surface. We'll either fill these with water if we want to go down, or we'll fill them with air when we want to come up. And then I guess let's do a tour of the inside of the sub. Does that sound good, Joe?
Yeah, Kimberly, that's perfect. Let's jump inside.
Okay, so I have a little staircase here, which is kind of dinky. Usually I'll just kind of jump on, but I think this is better. So we'll get up. You'll see here that there is a little staircase ring. So I'll go over here, and this is our hatch. Open up the hatch. And then I'm just gonna hop on in. Okay, so now I'm in the submarine. There's a bubble. We exist here. And you can see outside. Woo! So a lot of people think that submarines are really claustrophobic. And I can kind of understand that, but these ones are very, very different because we're in an acrylic sphere. So as soon as you go underwater, the acrylic basically just vanishes and you don't even notice it at all. I think the most that you'll notice it is kind of right at the surface. We usually have a cover on the surface to make sure that the sun doesn't go through the glass. And so that's the only time you might feel a little bit claustrophobic, but everyone that's ever been worried has been very, very, very excited and completely forgets about the claustrophobia as soon as I get in. So behind me are our air panels. This is our air panel, and this is our oxygen panel. So our air panel is mostly used for what I was calling before is our buoyancy control. And this basically will give us the ability to make sure that our sub is easily controllable in the water and that we're not sinking too far or that we're not just lifting and stuck at the surface. The oxygen panel is for life support. So for us, we just put in a little bit of oxygen the entire time as you're consuming air. And then we have what's called a scrubber down below, which is kind of hard to see. And the scrubber takes out the CO2 that you're breathing. And so that's kind of our air panel. We have some gauges, fake gauges to feel professional. And these are our depth gauges and a barometer. And then you pull down the step stool and then you have a joystick, just like a game. Over here is your electrical panel. And you can basically use this to sort of turn on our little computer, which is like this cute little tough pad right here. And this will control whether or not you want to use an arm. It'll give you more specific measurements. Like we have, so these are all analog gauges, but we also have digital gauges that will kind of give us a more accurate reading, and it helps us control our thrusters. But yeah, so that's basically mostly it, I think.
All right. Well, Kimberly, let's ask you a few questions while we got you sitting inside of the submersible. The first one being the build time. What's kind of an average build time to get one of these submersibles ready to go?
Oh, by build time, do you mean like from, I guess, can you ask the question again?
Yeah, of course. So to build one of these submersibles, what's the time commitment like? How long does it take to build one of the submersibles?
Oh, let's see. I feel like if you have all the parts ready at hand, it probably takes about a week to 2 weeks. I think the problem is that like everything kind of comes in at a trickle. And so the subs themselves, I think, are quite easy to put together and they're quite easy to take apart. We actually have to take them apart once every 3 years entirely to recertify them. But the most of the lead time is just buying parts. Like I think you have to order the acrylic maybe like 6 or 7 months in advance. But if you have a sub ready, then I feel like taking it apart and putting it together can be probably like 2 weeks time, 2 3 weeks. So it's not too bad.
All right. Well, Kimberly, I'm going to bring you back in because I know I asked you a couple questions while you were hanging out in the submersible, but we have you here live. So, I mean, we'd much rather hear from you live. And so you mentioned at the beginning, you know, some people are very worried about being claustrophobic when they jump into a submersible, especially for the first time. But you showed us that amazing acrylic dome that almost seems to disappear once you hit the water. Your first experiences with a submersible, what was that like? Were you kind of nervous? Did you feel that kind of claustrophobia, or did it just kind of melt away once you hit the water?
So I'm a scuba diver, I think like many ocean adventurers are. And so I think I kind of sort of got over my claustrophobia sort of when I had goggles on. But the interesting thing is with goggles, you have kind of a little bit of a tunnel vision a little bit, just because you don't have your peripherals as much. So it feels like when you're underwater, everything's kind of like, this is the first thing that I'm seeing, and now I see this thing that in front of me, and you kind of have to do this big sweep to see everything. When you go underwater in a submersible, the water just flows underneath you. There's bubbles all over as you're going down, and then it kind of just like opens like a show. You sort of look out, and then you can just like very, very quietly take in what's around you in this very natural way. The seals atmosphere. So when you go down, there's no pressure changes. There's nothing to worry about your body. You're not disoriented. You're not floating anywhere. You don't have to worry about your gauges, your oxygens. You can just go down and be amazed. It's the coolest.
Oh, I can imagine. I mean, as a diver, you are kind of always looking around, trying to take it all in because you're in this amazing 360 environment. But to have that taken away and have that full kind of view, I can only imagine what it's like to have that view when you're underwater. Very cool. So your career, I mean, you've worked on a lot of cool robotics projects, and you sent me a little bit of material here. I want to share a couple pictures because I want to touch on a couple of these projects because, I mean, they look really cool. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about them, and I have a feeling those tuning in would enjoy that as well. So this first one here, this arm, can you tell us a little bit about this project?
Yeah, so robotic arms underwater are known for being giant and electric and heavy and expensive, maybe like $500,000. So this arm is basically almost made entirely out of plastic and fabric. The only thing that's not are the bolts. We were looking into making plastic bolts, but the cool thing about this arm is that because it's only made out of plastic and fabric, it costs about, I don't know, maybe like $600 total in materials. And you can see these bellows kind of where the joints of the arms are. And they're basically just a kind of like an accordion shape. And so the idea is that when you inflate one side of the accordion, it inflates whoosh, and then will push the whole arm one direction. And then when you inflate it the other way, it'll push it the other direction. So inflatable arms are really interesting because for underwater actions and also in space, you don't quite know necessarily how far you are from the thing that you want to grab or do because you're usually not right next to it. And so this depth perception usually means that someone will take an electric arm and then smash it into the ground with a force that the arm doesn't know. You know, the arm's like, oh, I can do this. It smashes into the ground and then breaks itself. With an arm that's inflatable and pressure sensitive, you can get a feel for how hard it's going into the ground and also not break things. But if you do break it, it's very cheap to replace. So this kind of technology is really, really fun because you can also send it up to space really easily. You can pack it up really, really, really tightly and then inflate it with either air or water. This is one of my favorite projects to work on, and it's also the closest to some of the ocean stuff I'm doing right now. So it's like very meaningful to me.
Yeah, that's so cool. I love the portability of it, the lightweight, when you think of ROVs and breaking apart on an ROV, it's pretty darn scary because those things ROVs can cost millions of dollars. So you break the manipulator arm, and there's probably a lot of panic and worry going on. So having these kind of soft manipulators, replaceable, light, wow, really cool. I can see why you really had a lot of fun working on this project. Now I have a little video clip here, and maybe, I don't think there's any sound, so maybe you can tell us a little bit about what we're looking at in this little clip.
So this is a really cool project that I worked for when I was working on at SRI. So the Taurus robot is a smaller version of the Da Vinci, which many people, I think, have been operated on because it's one of it's like the surgical robot. And so this is a smaller version of it. And this is kind of something that I think is really interesting because it got me into this idea of telepresence in the first place. And we use these robots they're so much smaller than Da Vinci. This robot is primarily used this time for bomb defusal or disarmament. So this idea that you can send a robot in to go and do a bunch of tasks that a human could, but more safely because your human wouldn't be there. This is particularly interesting because this project, at the time, the Oculus had just come out. And so everyone was trying to figure out in what ways could you try to have 3D manipulators control robots with something that you'd use to play your video game with. We tried to do it actually with the arm that you just showed, the ocean arm, and we put someone on a boat. And, this is a very tough guy. And he has probably been on a boat his entire life, with robots and everything. And we put a little VR headset on him and he gets seasick within seconds. So hopefully in the future we'll fix that. but at the time it was this hilarious large man of the sea being seasick.
All right. Well, there's one more image here from one more project, and this looks so cool. Tell us a little bit about this one.
This is just a glamour shot. I'm just bragging at this point. So this was a project we did with Yamaha, and that we were to make a humanoid robot to challenge Valentino Rossi, who some of you may know is a many world champion for MotoGP. And so this was one of my favorite projects to work on, mostly because it was just a combination of lots of different technologies and then a skeleton around it to basically look like a human. But I mean, he looks pretty cool. So this is just like a very fun, when you work on robots, you get to work on a lot of really interesting problems. Some of them seemingly more useful than others, but still very cool.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I mean, there's no denying that you've worked on a wide range of projects, a wide range of robotics, really cool ways to explore and manipulate our environment. And, you know, I was looking on your website not too long ago, you're a hang glider as well, which looks like a ton of fun. How did you get into that?
So it's actually a little bit silly. I'm a little bit of a stubborn person. And at the time, I was complaining to one of my friends about, I'm also a social dancer. I really like swing dancing. And so I was inviting all of my friends out to go swing dancing. And they're like, oh, like maybe someday. And I'm like, they're swing dancing like every day. Like, why don't we want to go? And I was complaining to my friend. I was like, if you don't want to go, you should tell me you shouldn't go. So my roommate at the time was starting to learn how to hang glide. So he was like, Kinley, do you want to learn how to hang glide? And I was like, oh yeah, I'll give it a shot. And he's like, there's a spot on Sunday. And at the time, I really didn't actually want to go very much, but I had just complained to him about how people were like, oh yeah, I'll do this thing, and they never do. And so I was like, okay, I have to do this. And then I went. And the thing about hang gliding in California is that you learn on a little hill first. So you learn on a little 40-foot hill, and you run off of it, and you just basically glide off the bottom of the floor. And you do that on a really big wing, kind of like a surfboard. And then you slightly go down in size, and then you go up in hill. So you go big wing, small wing, and then little hill, big hill. And the feeling I feel like that you get when you lift off the ground is like a very overwhelming feeling, but it's also very a concentrated feeling. And it's this idea for me that I really love chasing, is that when you're in the zone and when you're concentrated, when you're thinking, there's nothing else that mattered. And that feeling, I think, brings you closer to the current moment in time, which is really impossible, I think, sometimes to find when you're kind of like walking in the world. It's like really hard to get your thoughts of everywhere and the future and the past and everything out. So hang gliding and piloting, I feel like, have the same sort of concentration. Like the only thing that really matters is right now, in like a very like tangible way, I think.
Yeah, very cool. So here's the $1 million question. You stepped up and you did the hang gliding. Did your friends then join you for the swing dancing?
No.
Oh, come on.
I know.
All right. Fair enough. All right.
I guess, I mean, I feel like, yeah, maybe jumping off the cliff is easier than hanging out with people.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, some people get very self-conscious when they're dancing. So maybe that's it. Maybe that's the problem. So a question here from YouTube. The subs, the submersibles, who decides where they go next?
So these, the subs that I work for a company called Global Subdive, and Global Subdive owns a very large ship called Go America, or manages a number of ships, one of them being Go America, that has this crane, which is rated to launch the subs. And so when you are like, hey, I have an idea, I have a filming project, I have a research project, I want to just go run around and adventure, you can call our company, Global Subdive, and you're like, hey, I want to go on this adventure. I need you for this many days in this many location. And then they'll be like, we've got you. We've got your support boat. We've got your big boat. We've got your submarines and your submarine pilots and your submarine technicians and your surface crew. So it's basically a whole submarine package in this specific instance. So kind of anyone, really.
All right. Really cool. Well, I got to start thinking about ideas and then call you up. That sounds like a good plan. One more question here from YouTube we can squeeze in. And this question is, okay, we saw that larger submersible where 3 people can fit in. So obviously maneuvering the submersible is really important. What else are you doing when you're down there?
So driving a submersible is actually quite easy, and I think everyone should go for it because it's very straightforward. It's slow, and you're always kind of taking into reaction. I think some things that you're worried about oftentimes are current, but the submersibles don't go faster than 2 knots underwater. They're more, I think Erica might have mentioned, they're more like elevators than they are like go-karts. And so if the current is any more than 2 knots, usually we won't dive anyway. But as a pilot, what you're mostly looking for is emergency procedures. So you want to make sure that the amount of air that you have for buoyancy is enough to get you to the surface, even in emergency situations. You want to make sure that the oxygen level in your cabin is appropriate for whoever's in it, and that your CO2 levels are okay, that your battery power is okay. We also are always communicating with the surface. So every 15 minutes, we have a call in with the surface to be like, hey, just so you know, this is where we are, this is our heading, this is how far we've traveled, this is how deep we are. And that way, if anything ever goes wrong, the surface kind of can sort of backtrack where they think we last communicated. And so most of the time as a pilot, what you're really thinking about is kind of just making sure that everything is kind of like check, 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 clear to go. Oftentimes when you're very close to a wall or very close to coral, you want to be just worried that there's nothing to entangle you. A lot of places we go have a lot of drag fishing. So like we want to make sure that there's not a lot of fishing line. But even in those situations where you get a little bit tangled or where something happens, it's very easy just to call the surface and be like, hey, we're coming up. And then it takes from, I think, the bottom of our subs, which is 1,000 feet, about 10 minutes to go straight to the surface. And there's no decompression that you need to worry about or anything like that. So you can just be like, I'm going to go up and just float on up as you ride the bubble up, which is quite nice. It's very fun.
All right, awesome. Well, I'll share this website here if anyone wants to explore globalsubdive.com. Kimberly, if anyone wants to follow along with your adventures, what's the best way to do that?
Oh, I guess I have an Instagram tag, which is, I think Mini Sharkwing is my Instagram tag.
Yeah.
I obviously don't post that much, but sometimes I do, and it's mostly pictures of the sky and the ocean at the same time.
Well, people like both of those things, so you can definitely check that out. Well, look, Kimberly, it was so great to have you join us. What a fun career you've had so far in engineering, as a submersible pilot. And I hope this is the first of many events where we get to explore, share the work that you're doing, and hopefully bring some students along for the ride next time.
I think that's great. If I could just add one thing, Joe, I would really appreciate it.
Go for it.
I just wanted to tell other people out there that it's totally okay if you don't know what you want to do is immediately. I feel like I wandered around for about a decade being like, oh man, I guess I could do this engineering thing, before sort of very fruitfully stumbling upon Erica and then building a relationship with her in education before she offered me a position as a pilot in training. And so I feel like a lot of people always ask me how you get into this and how you find yourself in this position. And I think maybe the best thing that I can sort of give people who are looking is just to be flexible and to keep your eyes open, and to just continue doing things that you love, even if you don't get paid for them. Not saying that you should only do them, but for example, if you're volunteering or scuba diving, just kind of like do the things that you love, and opportunities will come your way. That's it.
That's tremendous advice. I think, there's no right or wrong way to get into sciences or engineering. Everybody has a different story. Everybody has a different path. Sometimes it starts one way and ends up in a totally different place. So staying open, being curious, trying new things. I mean, there's nothing better. So yeah, absolutely great advice, Emily.
All right. Thank you so much. The women here are so inspiring. Thank you for hosting.
It's been a great weekend. Actually, we're about to switch over to our final 4 hours, our final session of the weekend. So time is just flying by. All these stories, I look up and 4 hours is gone. It's crazy. All right. Well, Kinley, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and hopefully we'll connect again soon.
All right. Have a good one. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Kinley. Okay, so we are at that time where we're almost out of recording space for our morning session, which means I now need to transition things to our final session of the day from 12 till 4. We have 8 amazing speakers coming up. So how do you follow along? How do you not miss out on what we're up to? I'm going to show you that right now before I start our next live event. So it's going to go live on the same YouTube channel. So you can use this link right here. I'm also going to post the link in the comment section of the YouTube channel. Also, if you've registered for the festival, you already have the link in your inbox. So you can just click on that link. We're going to go live in about 2 minutes on that new channel. Or sorry, not that new channel, that new stream. Worst comes to worst, go to our main channel page, Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants on YouTube, refresh it a couple times, and then on our main page, up at the top when we go live, you will see Sunday afternoon session live, and you just click on that and it's going to bring you right in. So thank you for joining us for the morning session. Make your way over, use that link. We're going to be live in under 2 minutes with Kinga Phillips. It's going to be great. So we will see you soon. In fact, let's play us out with our Lenovo EDU sizzle reel. They've so generously helped us make this weekend possible. Check it out. Join the community. It's an incredible community growing of educators, of students, of parents. Check it out. Here we go.